221. East. Dewey stared at his reflection and felt a rush of novelty. The Metamorph Magus gift made his appearance feel like clay, always pliable, always remoldable. In his new form, he could walk in Rivendell or Lothlorien, and most elves would never suspect who he really was. Of course, the talent still needed practice. For now, he could alter hair, skin, facial features, anything external, but not his voice or his height. With greater mastery, a Metamorph Magus could change height, gender, even apparent age. It was, in effect, a magical mystique. He could become an old man, a child, or a woman, and no spell could force him back. It was the ultimate disguise. Dewey kept practicing into the night, shifting faces and features until he was satisfied. The next morning, he formally took his leave of King Thengel. The king's attempts to make him stay were fruitless. He saw Dewey off, but the farewell was frosty. Dewey said a few words, smiled faintly, and left the palace. Thengel remained on his throne, dark-faced, and summoned his chief advisor, Mario. Mario arrived with a hangover from the previous night and a bleary look. "Your Majesty?" he asked, confused and dutiful. Thengel's stare was cold enough to make Mario shrink. After a long silence, the king spoke. "Mario, I have trusted you. Why have you betrayed me? Why have you worked with Saruman and stoked hatred between the Rohirrim and the Dunlendings?" Mario's face blanched. "Your Majesty, you must be mistaken. I am loyal to Rohan. I would never collude with Saruman. Someone is trying to slander me." Thengel's expression did not soften. "These are the words of the wizard Dewey. Do you think he lies?" Mario's protests grew more frantic. "That wizard has it in for me. He's twisting things. Those Dunlendings, many I killed when they harassed our border. He must be seeking revenge." Thengel watched him like a hawk. "Dewey told me more than that. He says you were ordered by Saruman to poison me so he could control Rohan." Mario's pupils tightened. He shook his head and spat. "I have never dealt with Saruman. I would never poison my king. Dewey is trying to weaken Rohan and make you suspicious of your loyal men." Thengel waved a dismissive hand. "We will see what the search finds." He sent soldiers to Mario's house. They returned quickly, hands trembling. A captain laid letters and a small vial of green liquid on the table. "Your Majesty, these were hidden in Advisor Mario's study." Mario went white, then crumpled to the floor. Only he knew where those things had been hidden. Thengel took the letters and read, his face growing colder with every line. When he returned them to Mario, he did not bother with subtlety. "Anything to say?" Mario, collapsing between terror and pleading, begged for mercy. Thengel's voice was flat with authority. "Bring me that bottle." "Drink it," the king ordered. Whether Mario denied, begged, or refused meant nothing. The evidence was plain. Dewey had not been there to see what followed, but he had already guessed the outcome. Saruman's agent exposed and punished. The letters were from Saruman. Mario had been his highest ranking inside Rohan, provoking clashes with the Dunlendings and planting the means to control the king. Saruman's plan had been elaborate. Foment border wars, place his own men in positions of trust, then use poison and manipulation to seize power, and eventually Isengard. He had not counted on Dewey's arrival or on Dewey's legitimacy. Dewey had sensed Mario's hostility, read his memories, and uncovered the conspiracy. With their scheme foiled, Dewey imagined the fury that must be boiling in Saruman now. Still, ruining Saruman's plan had been incidental to his own goals. Dewey left Edora's and changed his appearance again, becoming an ordinary-looking Easterling and stripping his robes down to simple garments. His height and voice were unchanged, but his face and skin were transformed enough that even those who knew him well would not recognize him at a glance. Rohan's eastern border is the Anduin. East of the river rise the Mountains of Shadow, and beyond them lies Mordor, the lair of Sauron, a gathering place for foul creatures and watched by the ever-seeing eye. No disturbance there escaped Sauron's notice. Even the mightiest, like Gandalf or Galadriel, dared not enter lightly. Dewey had no intention of walking into such a trap. After crossing the Anduin, he skirted Mordor to the north, into the vast, thinly populated wastes of Rovanion. Even with short-distance apparition and a flying broom, he spent over a month traveling before he reached Rhûn, where the Easterlings dwell. He became cautious now. Rhûn was not directly under Sauron's rule in the same way as Mordor, but it lay within his sphere of influence. Under Sauron's ascendancy, the eastern lands had been corrupted, many Easterling tribes still worshipped him or the power he represented. Dewey adopted a rugged Easterling guise, cast a disillusionment charm, and drifted among tribes, listening and watching. The people around him, black-haired, yellow-skinned, high-cheeked, felt alien. Their olive or waxy yellow complexions and hard, nomadic ways were nothing like the Eastern folk of any life Dewey remembered. He moved like a ghost through their camps, quietly asking after the blue wizards in Hildorian. Ordinary folk knew nothing. Under Sauron's shadow, many believed Sauron himself was their creator. Only when he sought out tribal chiefs and probed their minds with legitimacy did he find a lead. In Dorwinion, near the Sea of Rune, people had reported sightings of blue-clad wizards rallying locals against Sauron's reach. That was the first definite news Dewey had heard. He wasted no time heading for Dorwinion. All along his wandering, the system had remained mute. No sign-in confirmations had come through at the scattered tribes. Dewey thought about it. If every place could be registered, he would have completed the system's requirements long ago. Perhaps the eastern regions held the special check-in points. No matter. He was here now. The Sea of Rune, the largest inland sea in Middle-earth, is fed by the running river from Esgaroth and the Redwater from the Iron Hills. Dorwinion sits where a river pours into the northwest corner of that inland sea. It is famous for wine, strong, heady vintages that can lay even an elf low. Thranduil of the Woodland Realm was notorious for his fondness for Dorwinion wines, which were carried by river to Esgaroth and then rafted toward the Woodland Realm. The master of Esgaroth grew fat on the profits. Dorwinion is a broad, hot plain, ideal for grapes. From his broomstick, Dewey saw a carpet of vineyards below, rows upon rows tended by slow-moving figures. The sight of such prosperity in the Far East surprised him. Here, in a region touched by Sauron's influence, there were still pockets of peace and plenty, places where life went on and vines were carefully coaxed into fruitful abundance. 222. Brain shut-in Dewey was even more surprised to discover that Dorwinion was home not only to men, but to elves as well. In the west, whether in Rivendell, Lothlorien, or the Woodland Realm, elves kept to themselves, reclusive, courteous, and distant from most human affairs. In the Far East, however, humans and elves lived together in a mixed society. Flying over the region, Dewey saw both humans and elves working side by side in the vineyards. They shared the land while keeping their own districts and customs. He rode toward the largest elven quarter. Endless vineyards stretched out beneath him. Each vine looked ancient, its roots thick as coiled dragons. A single vine sprawled across thousands of square meters, climbing more than 10 meters high, its winding tendrils supported by massive trunks. Nestled in the vines were delicate little houses woven naturally from living shoots, bird nest-like dwellings hanging from the tendrils and reached by ladders of vine. These airy nests were characteristic of Dorwinion's elves, though some still lived in exquisite ground-level houses or in caverns among tree roots. One grapevine in particular caught Dewey's attention. It grew atop a small hill, its trunk so wide that several people would be needed to encircle it. Its bark split and furrowed like the scales of a giant dragon. The vine dominated the mound, spreading a leafy canopy like an enormous umbrella over 10,000 square meters. At the tree's base lay a sweep of emerald grass and an elven manor that stood proudly on the hill. The manor lord was quick to sense Dewey's presence. He peered into the air and called sharply, "Who goes there?" Elven guards surrounded the hill and leveled spears and bows at Dewey. Realizing he had been sighted, Dewey dropped his disillusionment charm, descended slowly, and landed before them. The manor lord's expression hardened, eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" Dewey saluted in the elven fashion and spoke Sindarin. "Friends of Dorwinion, be not alarmed. I am Dewey the wizard, come from the west with good intent." "A wizard? From the west?" The lord's tension eased slightly when he heard Dewey's flawless elvish and proper bearing, though he did not let down his guard entirely. "Yes, from Eriador, west of the Misty Mountains." Dewey inclined his head. "I am acquainted with the elves of Rivendell, Lothlorien, and the Woodland Realm." The name of those elven realms made the lord even more attentive, then surprised. Though far to the east, he had of course heard of those settlements, and especially of the Woodland Realm, which traded wine with Dorwinion. Convinced Dewey was no foe, he relaxed further and invited him to the manor as a guest. In the open-air banquet hall, elven attendants poured wine for Duer and the Lord. The table bristled with grape-based dishes and a variety of tropical fruits. Dorwinian's warm climate suited more than just the vine. Duer took a cautious sip. The wine was potent indeed, a draught that could leave men senseless and flatten even quick-footed elves if they were careless. The Lord introduced himself as Calanmere, a Sindar and one of Dorwinian's manor lords. He explained that Dorwinian had no single elven king or lord. It was a region of shared life between elves and men. Several elven peoples lived there, the Sindar, the Nandor, and the Avari, while the human population included descendants of the Edain, houses like Beor and Hador. Each people kept its own tongue, laws, and settlements. They lived apart in custom, but cooperated when need arose. In times of war or threat, particularly against the Easterlings, the communities formed alliances to repel invaders. Economically, the two races were intertwined. The elves brewed the wine, and the men handled transport. They shipped wine down the running river to Lake Town, and from there to the woodland realm, to Dale, and to the kingdom under the mountain. That close cooperation had made Dorwinian a stable, co-governed, enlightened place, the only part of the Far East that darkness had not yet touched. During the meal, Calanmere grew curious about Duer's purpose in coming so far east. "Wizard Duer," he asked, "Dorwinian lies thousands of miles from the west. What brings you here?" Duer did not conceal his reason. The elves had lived here for generations and might know more than others. "Lord Calanmere, have you heard of Hildorian?" "Hildorian? The awakening place of men?" Calanmere's brow lifted. Duer nodded, hope in his voice. "Do you know where it lies?" Calanmere looked regretful and shook his head. "I'm sorry. I know little. I've only heard it lies east of the Sea of Rune, farther east than Quivianen, the awakening place of the elves. It borders the Eastern Sea, a land few elves have ever set foot upon." Duer had expected such an answer and was not greatly disappointed. If the elves could not tell him, he would seek other leads. He tried another question. "Do you know the Blue Wizards, Morta and Romestamo?" "Moretta and Romestamo, of course." Calanmere brightened. "Dorwinian owes much of its peace to them. When the Easterlings and the Wainriders ran rampant and the East teetered into shadow, the two Blue Wizards traveled the region, organizing cooperation between men and elves. They repelled many raids and kept our land from corruption." Duer's eyes lit at the mention of the Blue Wizards. "Do you know where they are now?" "I would like to find them." Calanmere shook his head. "Their movements are erratic and secretive. They appear in distant places, sometimes deep within Easterling lands, encouraging humans who resist the shadow, stirring uprisings and creating confusion. That very activity keeps the dark powers occupied and has indirectly protected Dorwinian." He offered a lead, however. "If you seek them, try Dongi City, south of the Sea of Rune. There have been many disturbances there lately, uprisings that may have been sparked by the Blue Wizards." At that moment, Duer's pocket system chimed. "Hogwarts check-in system. Location Dorwinian detected. Do you wish to check in?" Delighted, Duer answered the prompt in his mind. "Check in. Check-in successful. Congratulations on receiving occlumency." Occlumency was a discipline of the mind that protected against external mental intrusion. It acted like a shield, blocking legilimency, and at advanced mastery, resisting compulsion like the Imperious Curse. To Duer, it was more than a defensive trick. Sauron's greatest weapon was the corruption of hearts, turning wills into slavery, as with the Ringwraiths. If occlumency could be mastered, perhaps Sauron's corruption could be resisted. If he reached the peak, maybe he could handle the One Ring as Bilbo had. Given that, Duer chose not to rush to find the Blue Wizards. At Calanmere's urging, he stayed in Dorwinian to learn occlumency first. The first lesson in occlumency was clearing the mind, stilling thoughts and emotions, achieving blankness and calm. It required rigorous self-control to exclude distractions. For Duer, that was not difficult. He already had a background in meditation, training to reach a state of no thought, and he bore the crown of wisdom that let his mind move fast while staying rational. Within days, he had reached the initial state of occlumency. Progress then accelerated. He built a shield-like barrier in his mind to isolate his thoughts from the outside world, a wall to keep legilimens at bay. To his surprise, as he grasped occlumency's basics, his legitimacy became controllable too. It was as if a switch had been installed in his mind. He could choose whether or not to hear another's thoughts instead of being an indiscriminate receiver of every passing mental murmur. His steady meditation had strengthened his mental power, and he quickly erected a solid inner bulwark against ordinary mind reading. He remembered tales of Professor Snape, who could not only resist Voldemort's legitimacy, but could craft false memories so convincing that Voldemort believed Snape loyal. Dewey wondered if he could go further, if he could build in his mind a vast fortress, perhaps like a mental Hogwarts Castle, to hide his soul and memories in its deepest keeps. If so, he might not only repel prying, but protect himself from slow erosion and corruption of the heart, against Sauron's poison and any other mental peril that preyed upon the will. 223. Sacrifice. Constructing a mental barrier was brutally taxing. Dewey practiced occlumency every day, pushing his mind until his reserves were exhausted, then taking a break to walk the vineyard with Calanmere, the estate owner. Because they had lived alongside humans for so long, the Elves of Dorwinion kept habits more like men than many of their kin. Among them, the Sindar were renowned winemakers, the Nandor the finest grape growers, and the Avari acted as wine merchants who dealt most with humans. The grapevines here lived for centuries, often for thousands of years, spreading over acres and bearing abundant fruit. The Nandor tended them with obsessive care. The grapes were unusually sweet and fragrant and could restore physical strength with startling speed. Their magic was such that even the hardiest elves could be felled by the wine they produced. Calanmere's vine was the most precious of all, a mother plant said to be tens of thousands of years old. Every year, Calanmere harvested its fruit and personally brewed the wine, then locked the best barrels in a vast cellar to age for decades or centuries, to be used only for honored guests or special gifts. Dewey was lucky enough to taste a bottle that had been kept for 1,000 years. It was rich and lush, heavy with fruit and an almost medicinal sweetness. It steadied his spirit, and he found himself taking a few extra glasses without meaning to. As expected, he blacked out, sleeping a full day and night, and woke without a hangover. Instead, he felt clearer, fresher, and noticed his mental power had edged upward. The effect surprised him. If his mind could grow this way, he thought wryly, he might learn to forgive the habit. After nearly a month in Dorwinion, Dewey had finally built a mental stronghold in his mind, a rough Amon Sul. It was only a prototype, no Hogwarts with towers and halls, but it was a solid start. Without the blessings of the Crown of Wisdom and the Golden Cup, it would have taken years to reach even this stage. With the fortress in place, his brain felt armored. Ordinary mental magics would now strike a wall. Anyone trying legitimacy on him would be stopped cold. Even Saruman's voice magic and Sauron's mental erosion could no longer sweep over him as they once had. He could now hold out for minutes rather than collapsing instantly. He also found himself calmer and less cluttered by stray emotions and thoughts, an unexpected bonus. Dewey decided not to waste all his time perfecting the fortress. Building a mental Hogwarts would be a lifelong project. He would add to it gradually. He bid farewell to Calanmere, gifting him a small spatial pouch enchanted with an undetectable extension charm. Calanmere was delighted and, in return, sent Dewey off with a dozen barrels of treasured wine brewed from the mother vine. Dewey accepted gladly, mounted his flying broom, and left Dorwinion. He crossed the Sea of Rune and turned east. East of the sea lay the lands of the Easterlings, many tribes and petty kingdoms, mostly primitive and steeped in constant warfare. Here were followers of Sauron, remnants who still worshipped Morgoth, and tribes stirred into rebellion by the Blue Wizard. Violence and superstition went hand in hand. To avoid attention, Dewey used his metamorph magus talent to take the appearance of an Easterling and traveled among the tribes. Every tribe showed worship of Sauron, iron-cast effigies, carved symbols, wooden idols, and every village had black sacrificial altars. Captives taken during raids were the usual offerings. Skulls piled as foundations, hearts cast into the sacrificial fire, blood used as ink for Mordor's black spells. Hidden in an unseen corner, Dewey watched with disgust. He had wanted to intervene and save some of the doomed, but his legitimacy revealed why he should not. These people were part of the same system. Those who made offerings today would be the revilers tomorrow. The captives' deaths perpetuated the cycle. There was no saving a people who sacrificed others without compunction. The ritual had effects. When a life was given, the statue of Sauron would exhale a malignant power that washed over the crowd, bringing wild ecstasy and a sudden boost to strength. The Easterlings called it the God's Blessing. Dewey saw it for what it was: corruption. The power exchanged temporary vigor for life force, perverting bodies and minds into servants of Sauron. He planned to leave, but a long, piercing cry split the air. A fell beast descended from the sky, black against the sun. The tribe cheered as one. The divine messenger has come. On the beast's back sat a ring wraith. Dewey's face tightened. If the ring wraith learned of his presence, it would mean Sauron's notice and disaster. He could not afford that. Apparition was out of the question. The flare and noise would surely draw attention. His disillusionment charm hid him from ordinary eyes, but not from a ring wraith. With no better choice, he removed the disillusionment, took on the rough look of an Easterling, and melted into the crowd. The fell beast alighted on the altar with a stench of rot. Its presence radiated a fear that made the skin crawl. Its tail lashed out, hurling a few villagers across the stone. The tribe barely reacted, bowed and reverent as the ring wraith stepped forward. It leaned before the statue, and then, impossibly, reached its spectral hand through the statue's chest and drew forth wailing shapes, souls of the fallen, recently sacrificed and from past offerings alike. The ring wraith devoured them one by one, a hollow hunger consuming every cry until nothing remained. The ring wraith's hollow eyes settled on the crowd with palpable satisfaction. "Your offerings please me," it intoned in a voice like a grave. "As reward, you shall receive a blessing." A black mist spilled from it and surged through the gathered folk. They clamored greedily for it, as for a drug. Those who took it contorted, skin washed to gray, eyes alight with madness, faces warped by an inner rot. The more thoroughly corrupted began to wither. Their souls, when they died, would not pass on but become malevolent spirits bound to the ring wraith. The crowd welcomed the change. In their minds, it was a gift from a god. Dewey could not allow the dark power to touch him. He braced himself and resisted, which made him stand out among the worshippers like a sore thumb. "You are not from here," the ring wraith hissed. Its hollow eyes flared red, and a suffocating, crushing aura burst outward, locking onto Dewey. Once he was discovered, Dewey didn't hesitate. He pulled out a potion vial and hurled it at the ring wraiths. They were cautious and didn't let the bottle get close. They raised their hands and a black force shattered the glass. For a moment it seemed the potion had been neutralized. Then the vial detonated, blasting out a blinding, dazzling light. Everyone instinctively shut their eyes. Those who couldn't react in time were instantly blinded. Sunlight. The ring wraiths felt the sun's attribute in the light. They were not as vulnerable to sunlight as orcs or trolls, but it still made them extremely uncomfortable. Their black cloaks snapped up and around them like bat wings. The fell beast panicked, rearing and trampling the Easterlings beneath it. Men and beasts were thrown into chaos and death. The vial had been a flash potion Dewey had prepared, a practical light-producing brew intended as a wandless lumos. Drawing on the light of Arendelle and Professor Snape's notes, Dewey had given it the attribute of sunlight. In the magical world, it might have been an odd concoction, but in Middle-earth, it became a true flashbang against creatures of darkness. The explosion bought him an instant. Dewey apparated away as the light flared, leaving behind a scattering of potion liquid that glowed like spilled phosphor. When the light faded, the ringwraiths pulled their cloaks back and glared at the ruined vial, and then in the direction where Dewey had vanished. A terrible aura unfurled from them, sweeping across the square. Countless people and buildings were scorched in a heartbeat. Flames of anger flickered in their hollow eyes. "Who was that?" one demanded, but no one answered. The ringwraiths, furious and suspicious, immediately ordered the nearby Easterling tribes and petty kings to hunt down the Easterling who matched Dewey's disguise. Dewey, dozens of kilometers away, had no idea he'd been placed on a wanted list. Still, he was cautious. He changed his appearance into that of another Easterling and continued toward Dongi City, switching faces at every tribe he passed. The Easterlings were mostly tribal and primitive. Cities like Rohan or Gondor were rare. Dongi City was the exception. Once the seat of Kamal, former king of the Easterlings, Dongi had been a place of authority. Kamal had unified the tribes, then fallen to one of the 9 rings and become a wraith in Sauron's service. By destroying Kamal's ring, Dewey had removed Sauron's direct instrument of control over the Easterlings, a cut that, in its own small way, weakened Sauron's grip in the Far East. Dongi lay east of the Sea of Rune, against the Orokarni Mountains, the Red Mountains of Kenya. Those ranges were one of the places the Valar formed after Morgoth's destruction of the 2 lamps, and 4 of the 7 dwarf kind awoke there. Over long years of Sauron's influence, some of those mountain dwarves had become corrupted and turned into dark dwarves, swearing fealty to Sauron and joining his forces alongside the Easterlings. Dewey had disguised himself constantly on the trip east and only reached Dongi a month later than he might have if he'd traveled openly. The delay had been necessary. The ringwraiths in the region had multiplied to 3, patrolling on fell beasts. Crows and vampire bats swarmed day and night. Easterling bands were rounding up and killing or detaining strangers with the attitude of better 100 innocents dead than 1 guilty go free. Sauron's spies were active. If Sauron suspected Dewey was in the east, he might use a palantir to find him. Palantiri varied in size and range. Dewey's was small and limited. Sauron's was vast, covering Mordor and parts of Gondor, and reaching into the Easterling lands. Dewey had to be careful. Dongi, though called a city, was essentially a large tribal stronghold. In its center rose Kamal's old palace of great red stones. The city had become a melting pot of Wainriders, Balkoth, Chiahir, and other Easterling peoples. With Kamul gone, none of the tribes dared rule outright. Each coveted the palace and the prestige it represented. When Dewey arrived, he found 2 of those tribes fighting for the prize. Outside the walls, thousands of Wainriders and Balchoth slaughtered one another. The Wainriders, famed for fighting for massive chariots, had long harried Gondor. The Balchoth, a fierce people driven east from the southeast of Mirkwood after the last alliance, were brutal warriors. For a time, the clash was brutal and even. Dewey apparated to an empty stretch of the city wall and watched. The battle dragged all day. The chariots gradually gave the Wainriders the edge, and just as the Balchoth began to falter, a third force struck. A mounted cavalry charged down from the distant hills, soldiers in finer armor and with more polished weapons than either the Wainriders or Balchoth. They cut through both armies without discrimination. Dorwinians! Someone shouted. Neither side had expected the intervention. With bodies already reduced and morale frayed, they could not resist the sudden cavalry charge. The Dorwinians routed both armies in a single sweep. Dewey tensed. The Dorwinians were known to him from Calanmir, the elven lord of Dorwinion. Though technically a branch of the Easterlings, they had refused Sauron's yoke. They traded with the Elves of Dorwinion and with Dale and the Woodland Realm, unusual moderation among the Easterlings. More important, Calanmir had told him the Dorwinians had ties to the Blue Wizards. The Blue Wizards had once helped them escape Sauron and had continued to aid their resistance. Seeing the Dorwinian banner sparkled a light in Dewey's chest. After all his searching, here was a trace of the Blue Wizards at last. The Dorwinians fought well and wore down the Wainriders and Balkoth until a fell beast's shriek cut across the field. The Wainriders and Balchoth brightened at the sight of the flying terror. The Dorwinians and their horses melted into fear. The fell beast swept low like a living battering ram, its wings flinging men and horses aside. The thundering cry of despair it released struck into souls, sapping courage and replacing it with an urge to flee. Dewey's face went flat. Fell beasts always accompanied the ringwraiths. He had considered apparating away, but he didn't want to miss the chance to contact anyone connected to the Blue Wizards. He stayed. He changed his appearance in an instant. Wrinkles deepened, his height sank a little, his back hunched. In the blink of an eye, he looked like a tall, thin, white-haired old man, not unlike Gandalf. The Dorwinians were crushed between their vengeful enemies and the ringwraiths on the fell beast. Their horses bolted and threw riders. The Dorwinians' lines began to break. At that moment, the system reacted. Hogwarts check-in system, locating Dongi City. Do you want to check in? Dewey's spirits lifted. He didn't hesitate. Check in. Check-in successful. Congratulations on obtaining the method for making the invisibility cloak. an invisibility cloak. Dewey blinked with surprise. He had not expected to check in on the second Deathly Hallow so soon. The notification did not help the desperate Dorwinians in the instant, though. Below, the Dorwinians were near annihilation. Dewey made his decision. Vanish, all evil. He lifted a staff whose looks he had altered by transfiguration and poured forth a blinding, holy light. To avoid revealing his true identity, Dewey relied on the holy light spell he had learned from Gandalf. The glow made the ringwraiths uneasy. The fell beast screamed, wheeling high into the sky to escape its radiance. A ringwraith exhaled a poisonous black breath and fixed its red, burning eyes on the unfamiliar old man who had appeared out of nowhere. "Who are you?" "I am Albus Dumbledore, you foul spirit. This is not your domain. Return to the netherworld," Dewey called, keeping his voice grave. He struck his staff hard, sending a wave of luminous magic that shoved the ringwraith and its fell beast back. "Albus Dumbledore? Humph, never heard of him. Just some nameless nobody," the ringwraith sneered, eyes flashing. "This is the Dark Lord's territory. If you dare show your face here, you will stay and serve me forever." It drew a Morgul blade and melted into shadow, lunging at Dewey with lethal speed. Before the blade reached him, though, an invisible, nearly impenetrable barrier stopped the attack. Dewey had used the Ring of Power on his finger to form a magical shield. Under Celebrimbor's instruction, he had given the ring a basic veiling. Like the 3 elven rings, it was hidden unless he willed otherwise. Nobody could see it, save perhaps the bearer of the One Ring. Confident in that concealment, Dewey had no qualms about using it now. The ringwraith tried to break the ward, but Dewey had stored a vast reserve of magic within the ring. He had filled it with a month's worth of power before he set out for the east and had topped it up during the journey. The shield would hold until that reserve ran out. Still, Dewey disliked squandering the ring's stored energy. He lifted his staff and chanted an old elven incantation. The sky darkened, and a bolt of lightning struck down into the staff. No thunderous storm of Gandalf or Saruman, only a narrow, arm-thick shaft of electric light, the limit of what he could summon. He drove the staff forward. The lightning whipped at the fell beast. The ringwraith twisted aside in time, but the beast was struck full on. It screamed as its neck was torn open, black, poisonous blood pouring out. It crashed, convulsing, barely clinging to life. The ringwraith launched a mental assault, probing for weakness. It met another barrier, this one a solid, impenetrable mental shield that sealed Dewey's thoughts like a fortress. The specter had never encountered such an opponent, an enemy wrapped in both an unbreakable spell ward and an absolute block upon the mind. Finding nothing to exploit and seeing Dewey preparing to summon lightning again, the ringwraith chose retreat. Its burning eyes bored into Dewey as it dissolved back toward Mordor. "Albus Dumbledore, I will remember you," it hissed before fading out. Dewey exhaled quietly. If the fight had continued, he might have been forced into revealing more than he had planned. He had been careful throughout to use only powers known in Middle-earth. He could not risk showing anything that would betray who he really was. Nor could he slay the ringwraith. If one of them fell, Sauron would feel it and turn his gaze this way. Under Sauron's watch, Dewey had little hope of keeping his disguise. He could not linger in Dongi City, either. The sudden presence of a strange wizard in the east would draw Sauron's notice long after the ringwraith returned to Mordor. Dewey turned to the wreckage of the battlefield. The Dorwinians were shaken. Their divine emissary had fled, and their divine beast lay dying. The chariot men and Balkoth had already fled in terror. Dewey walked straight to the crippled fell beast, and with a decisive strike of his staff, ended its suffering. He set it alight to ensure nothing of its dark essence remained. Then he went to the Dorwinians. One man, clearly their leader, stood his ground. The chief bowed, awed and wary. "I am Balg, chief of the Dorwinians," the man said. "Thank you, Mr. Dumbledore, for saving us. If there is anything we can do—" Dewey had spoken his assumed name aloud earlier. Balg had heard it and believed him a divine savior. Dewey tossed the chief a small potion bottle. "This is a healing draught. 1 drop eases injury. Give it to your soldiers. We must leave now. There are more ringwraiths nearby. If they return in force, we won't get away." Balg caught the bottle carefully, astonished. He did not doubt Dewey's word after what he had seen. He had his men drink the medicine. Those that survived watched in amazement as wounds knit and color returned. Where some thought such a precious elixir should be hoarded, Balg commanded its use, and the men recovered in a matter of moments. To the Dorwinians, Dewey was a god and the little bottle divine. Once the wounded were tended, Balg gathered his tribe. They had no desire to hold Dongi City like the Chariot Men or the Balkoth. They preferred guerrilla resistance, ambushes, raiding supply lines, attrition, the tactics the Blue Wizards had taught them that had kept the East from falling completely under Sauron's heel. Hearing the name of the Blue Wizards brightened Dewey's mood. "Do you know where the Blue Wizards are?" he asked. "I came looking for them." Balg answered cautiously. "Which one, Mr. Dumbledore?" "The Blue Wizards are elusive, and their paths cross nearly all the lands of the East. Romistamo mainly moves in Rune. Moretta goes south, Khand and Harad. Can you contact either of them?" "Morta has not been to the north for some time. We can try to contact Romistamo for you," Balg said. "The two saved our people from the Dark Lord's yoke. We owe them much. I cannot promise he will agree to meet you, but we will try." Dewey nodded. That would be enough. He rode with Balg's contingent. They galloped through the night, and by dawn on the second day reached the Dorwinian settlement. Balg led him to a shrine where two stone statues stood, staff in hand, one long-bearded, the other shorter, their cloaks hiding much of their faces. They were, Balg explained, the Blue Wizards Romistamo and Moretta, honored with carved likenesses. Nearby, at the base of the statues, sat a stone basin filled with water. Runes and incantations were carved along its rim. The water shimmered with a faint magic. Balg told Dewey the basin was holy water. Children were baptized there to ward them against corruption and evil, a ritual that blended light magic and tradition. Dewey studied the runes, intrigued. Balg murmured a few words, and the surface of the basin rippled, images flickering across it like an illusion. Dewey felt a slight weave of magic in the chief's chant, crude but real. "Romistamo taught our ancestors some sorcery to help in war," Balg admitted. "I am no great mage. I can only do small things." Dewey found himself more surprised than ever. In this world, magical talent tended to be innate. That ordinary folk could be taught practical sorcery by a wizard was remarkable. What manner of wizards were these who had given common people a way to wield even small measures of magic? As he watched, a figure in blue robes swam into being across the water's surface, formed of light and reflection. The voice that answered Balg's call was crisp and amused. "Balg, why do you summon me?" The surface of the stone basin shimmered like a polished mirror, and in it the face of a gaunt, deep-set, weathered man in blue robes looked back. Gray goatee, sharp eyes, the kind of face that carried both years and wisdom. It was Romistamo, one of the two Blue Wizards. As with Gandalf and Saruman, Romistamo was not a private name so much as a title, Savior of the East, bestowed by those he had aided. His companion Moretta bore the title Remover of Darkness. Both were Maiar, attendants of Orome, the Vala of the Hunt. Morta had volunteered to go to Middle-earth to help the Free Peoples against Sauron, and had persuaded his friend Romistamo to come with him. Once on the shores of Middle-earth, they had pushed straight east, to the lands where Orome once hunted, to lend aid to human tribes who had turned from Morgoth, and to foment rebellion behind Sauron's lines. Balg, the leader of the Dorwinian, knelt before the basin and spoke with reverent haste. He recounted the battle in Dongi City the previous day, then added, "Romistamo, we were saved by another wizard from the ringwraiths and their fellbeasts. He wishes to visit you. Would you meet him?" "A wizard?" Romistamo raised an eyebrow, curious. "What wizard?" "Albus Dumbledore," Balg replied. "He says he comes from the west." Standing to one side, Dewey felt a heat of embarrassment at the name. He stepped up to the stone basin and bowed his head respectfully to the image. "Wizard Romistamo, my true name is Dewyer," he said. "I come at the counsel of Gandalf the Grey and Radagast the Brown." At the words, something shifted. The lines of age that had marked Dewey's face melted away as if a mask had been lifted. The bent, old figure Balg had known straightened into a tall, vigorous man. Balg stared, jaw slack, unable to hide his astonishment at the sudden transformation. Romistamo in the water mirror showed a brief flicker of surprise as well, then smiled kindly. "So you are the black-robed Dewyer," Romistamo said. "I did not expect you to be so young." Though I have dwelt in the East, tales of your deeds have reached even there. Compared to you, those of us who have done less feel ashamed." "You are too modest, Wizard Romastamo," Duir waved the compliment away. "If not for you and Morda holding Sauron in the East, thwarting his plans and bleeding his strength, the West might already be under his shadow." They exchanged pleasantries and news of East and West for a time. Then Romastamo steered the conversation more directly. "You have come so far to find me, Duir. Is there something important?" Duir took the chance. "I seek Hildorian, the birthplace of men. I need something from there, but the place has been forgotten by most. You and Morda have roamed the East. Perhaps you know of this valley?" Romastamo's eyes brightened. "You seek Hildorian?" Duir nodded. "It is said the land there holds what I need." Romastamo smiled, something like regret and fond memory mingling on his face. "Many do not know Hildorian, but Moretta and I do. When we first came to the East, we wandered long and wide before finding a hidden valley by chance, what we named the Valley of Slumber. It lies in the far east, hemmed by the Wind Mountains on the west and the Eastern Sea on the east. Its beauty and sanctity rival even the Blessed Realm. The soil and waters are thick with life. Morda and I tarried there for a time. Had it not been for our mission, we might have retired there." Duir felt his spirits rise. After so long wandering the East, at last a sure lead. Romastamo read the eagerness in his face and gently cooled it. "Hildorian is veiled by divine power. Its visibility is not a thing of maps alone." "What conditions?" Duir asked quickly. "Men awoke on the first day of the first year of the First Age, when the first sun touched Middle-earth," Romastamo explained. "Hildorian will only reveal itself at the first ray of sunrise on New Year's Day. Only then can one enter the Valley of Slumber." Duir's hope dimmed a little. "But this year's New Year has already passed." "Then you must wait until the next," Romastamo said. "If you are willing to wait, after I settle some matters here, I will show you the path and draw a route to Hildorian." That was exactly what Duir needed. "I would be grateful beyond words, Wizard Romastamo," Duir added, eager to repay whatever kindness he could. "If there is any service I can do for you, please tell me." Romastamo's face grew serious, and he sighed. "It is Morda. He may be in trouble, somewhere in Harad to the south. He has fallen silent. We used to trade news often. Now there is only silence. I had planned to go alone, but I have a foreboding that the journey will be perilous. One wrong step could mean doom. When I felt you nearby, it changed the balance. I would ask you to come south with me to find and rescue Morda." Duir started, the plea settling into him like a drumbeat. "I will go," he said. They arranged to meet at the Dorwinian encampment. For more than half a month, Duir remained among the Dorwinians. Then, one bright morning, a tall figure in deep blue robes rode into camp, mounted not on horse but on a great white ox, the beast's hide gleaming like frost and two enormous horns curving from a noble head. The Dorwinians cheered as their savior dismounted. Romastamo greeted them with warmth, remembering names and faces. When his glance found Duir across the clearing, he smiled and inclined his head. He led his mount closer. "Wizard Duir, this is the first time we meet face to face. I have long been curious about you. You are as remarkable as the tales say." Duir had never before met a blue wizard in person. Romastamo's bearing combined the mystique of a Maya with the untamed ease of a born hunter, a man shaped by open places rather than council rooms. Duir's gaze drifted to the ox. It was enormous, more than the size of common cattle, its coat a pale, luminous white that threw back the sunlight. The horns were like carved ivory, pure and proud. "That is your mount?" Duir asked. "It is magnificent." Romastamo's smile deepened. He patted the creature's neck. "His name is Norimal. He is an Aral cattle, a descendant of Oromi's own ox. I found him as a calf in the hills by the Sea of Rune, and he has been my companion ever since." The ox gave a low, intelligent moo, as if acknowledging the conversation. As an attendant of Orom, Romastamo's choice of mount made sense. Oroma's servants had many mighty beasts, Huan the Hound, Nahar from whom the Maeras are descended, and Oroma's ox among them. Each bore ancestral power. Huan slew the great wolves of Morgoth. Nahar's line was fleet as wind. Duir wondered what gifts the oxen's descendants might bring. Romastamo reached into his cloak and drew out a folded parchment. "This is the route to Hildorian," he said, handing it to Duir. Duier unfolded it and felt a warm lightness in his chest. This map would let him reach Hildorian and be there to enter the Valley of Slumber at New Year's sunrise, to gather the last salt of flesh he needed for the Philosopher's Stone. "You have my deepest thanks, Wizard Romistamo. You have done me a great service." Romistamo's expression clouded again. "There is one more thing. As I said, Moretta. After we came east, we divided our tasks. I worked among the Easterlings, while Moretta went south into Khand and Harad. Recently, his messages stopped. I cannot say more now. The tale is not easy to tell. Come with me south. We must find him, and if danger has claimed him, we must answer it." Duer felt the pull of the journey already. "Rescue now, wait for Hildorian later." He nodded. "Then, I will go with you." A premonition? Duai knew that beings like Romistamo and Gandalf had an intuition almost like prophecy. Still, he hesitated. If the danger was great enough to trap Moretta, and had even set off a warning in Romistamo, who was going to rescue him, what difference could a lesser wizard like himself make? Yet having been helped by them, he could not turn his back. After a moment's inward struggle, Dewey sighed and decided he could not stand by while the two blue wizards fell. As far as he knew, the two had long resisted Sauron's influence in the east, easing the pressure on the west and contributing significantly to the final victory. After the War of the Ring, only Gandalf of the Five Wizards returned to Valinor. Saruman lost that right through his betrayal. Radagast, absorbed by the earth and its creatures, abandoned his mission and stayed in Middle-earth, and the fate of the two blue wizards was barely recorded. Many believed they had failed and could not return. Dewey did not know exactly how they had failed, but seeing Moretta in peril and Romistamo preparing a rescue, he suspected that without help, the two might indeed be lost, as Romistamo had sensed. He could not let Romistamo fall into that danger. He accepted the invitation to go with him to rescue Moretta. Romistamo was overjoyed and deeply grateful. He and Moretta had been close friends. When Moretta, then called Alatar, volunteered to go to Middle-earth, Romistamo, whose original name was Palando, had come with him to stand against Sauron. Knowing the risk, he had still not hesitated to try to save his friend. "I know this journey is fraught with peril," Romistamo said, producing from beneath his robe a white horn with gold inlay. "This is the Horn of Victory. When sounded, its call travels great distances. It brings terror to foes, courage to friends, and can summon companions from afar. I carried it with me from Valinor. I give it to you. Please, do not refuse." Dewey realized at once that the horn came from Valinor and was no ordinary object. He tried to refuse. "I can't take something you cherish, Romistamo. Keep it. This horn has been with you so long." But Romistamo would not be denied. He pressed the horn into Dewey's hands. "Moretta and I made this together long ago. If we can rescue him, we can make another. If we cannot, the horn will mean nothing to me." Given Romistamo's insistence, Dewey accepted. The horn was of white horn, flawless and jade-like, radiating a faint, sacred light. Ancient, mysterious carvings ran along it. It thrummed with power. It was clearly a divine artifact of sound. Its blast could sow terror and pain among enemies while inspiring allies, and friends could hear its call across thousands of miles. Now armed with such an artifact, Dewey felt his resolve deepen. He would not fail Romistamo. They did not linger with the Dorwinian folk. Romistamo and Dewey set off south toward the lands of Khand and Harad. Khand lay southeast of Mordor, home to the horse-breeding Variegs, fierce cavalry like the Rohirrim. Harad was south of Mordor. Its peoples ranged from the near Haradrim, brown-skinned, black-haired folk somewhat like the men of Gondor, to the far Haradrim, darker and wilder, rumored to be mingled with evil breeds. The Haradrim tamed Mumakil, monstrous war animals like moving towers. Moretta had long worked in Khand and Harad, fomenting resistance to Sauron and infiltrating their high ranks. As Romistamo spoke of Moretta's deeds, Dewey could only marvel. Romistamo had been coordinating guerrilla warfare in the east. Moretta had worked like a spy, undermining Sauron's rule from within. Dewey traveled low on his flying broom. Romistamo rode a wild ox that kept pace. To avoid notice, they skirted inhabited areas and bypassed the tribes of Khand. Romistamo was sure Moretta was not in Khand, so they pressed on. A week later, they entered Harad. Harad was a rough, mixed land, near and far Haradrim. Pirates, bandits, and black Númenóreans, those Númenorian descendants who had been corrupted and joined Sauron's cause. Much of Harad was desert. Avoiding the Harad Road, they crossed the sands toward Minas Harad, a vast fortress built deep in a gorge to oversee the region. They concealed themselves behind a sand dune and watched the fortress in the gorge. The wild ox waited silently behind them, sensing danger. "Rumestamo, are you certain Moretta is there?" Dewey whispered. Rumestamo nodded. "I am certain. I can feel our connection. He is there." Respecting the bond between the two blue wizards, Dewey did not press for more. Rumestamo closed his eyes and softly called, "Alatar, Alatar." His voice carried a strange, quiet power. When he opened his eyes again, he fixed his gaze on a tall tower within Minas Harad. He's in that tower. The problem was reaching it. Minas Harad swarmed with Haradrim's soldiers and orcs, guarded by Mumakil, and dark-winged giant bats circled the tower. A disturbance might draw the eye of Sauron himself. Dewey suggested stealth first. If we can secretly free Moretta, that's best. If not, we'll break out with him. He drew his wand and cast a disillusionment charm on himself, then on Rumestamo. Invisible under the cover of night, they crept toward the fortress, leaving the ox behind to be summoned if needed. They slipped past the Mumakil and marched to the gate. Invisible, they crossed the guard lines, but as they passed an orc, it sniffed the air and tensed. "Confundus," Dewey whispered, and the orcs nearby became dazed, their attention gone. They passed through the gate, ducked past checkpoints, and finally reached the tower where Moretta was held. Giant bats drifted and cawed overhead. Haradrim and orcs manned the ramparts, but the two wizards climbed carefully, floor by floor. At the top, they found Moretta in an iron cage, his body broken and marked by torture. His staff was gone. He lay weakly amid spikes. Rumestamo's face tightened with worry. With little heed for danger, he shattered the cage with his staff and freed his friend. The giant bats, alarmed, shrieked and swooped to attack. "Protego," Dewey called, throwing up a shield to ward off their talons. Seeing Morta barely conscious and fading, Rumestamo reached for his healing power, but Dewey stopped him. He took out a golden cup and poured in a prepared recovery potion, shaking it to stir the magic, then fed it to the unconscious wizard. The potion, aided by the cup's enchantment, brought some color back to Moretta's face. He opened his eyes slowly. When he saw Rumestamo, he did not smile in relief but looked terrified. "It's a trap," he gasped. "You leave, quickly!" Hearing Morta's warning, Dewey and Rumestamo felt a chill run through them. The giant bats attacking them suddenly broke off and circled the tower, closing in as one, while emitting a piercing, disorienting, ultrasonic shriek. Dewey almost clutched their heads. The sound made their skulls and organs ache as if they would burst. Dewey ground his teeth and cast a silencing charm, wrapping himself, Rumestamo, and Moretta in a muted bubble. Relief washed over them, briefly. The bats' ultrasonic assault only grew stronger, making the tower walls crack and crumble. "Dewey, blow the horn of victory," Rumestamo barked. Dewey pulled the horn free and blew. The note rolled out like a rising sun or the crack of distant thunder, bright and full, filling Minas Harad. The horn of victory sent a powerful sound wave that countered the bats' ultrasonics, scrambling their senses. They flew blind and mad, slamming into the tower and one another. The Haradrim and orcs who heard the horn were seized with fear. Courage left them, weapons clattered from numb hands, and they fled. Dewey reached for apparition to escape with Rumestamo and Moretta, but his expression hardened. He could not apparate. It was the same paralyzing block he'd felt when Saruman had hunted him before. The air chilled, dark dread bleeding outward. From the shadows, 3 ringwraiths glided forward, each exuding a suffocating aura. A fell beast circled above, and atop it, Saruman sat in plain sight, sneering as he looked up at the broken tower. "Well, well," he hissed. "I only meant to catch one prize, and here's another delivered to my door." Saruman's gaze lingered on. "Black-robed Dewey, how did you enjoy your visit to Orthanc? I've been waiting to lay hands on you, to learn what delights you know." There was malice in his voice and pleasure in the hunt. Rumestamo's eyes went cold when he saw a staff in Saruman's hand, a staff he knew was Moretta's. Anger and betrayal flared. "Saruman, you conspired with Sauron against Moretta. Have you forgotten what you were sent to do?" The two blue wizards had once traveled east with Saruman. They had been comrades. That Saruman now held Moretta's staff meant only one thing. Saruman shrugged, contempt clear on his face. "My mission? power, strength to rule this world. He ignored the accusation and coldly ordered the ringwraiths, "Deal with the other blue wizard." He turned his gaze to Dewey with the languid cruelty of a cat toying with a mouse. "As for the black-robed one, I'll take him afterward." The ringwraiths raised their Morgul blades and blurred into shadows, surging at Romestamo. Moreta, broken and drained, offered no resistance. His staff had been seized. Romestamo trusted Moreta's life to the best of his ability and met the ringwraiths head-on. The Nazgul, amplified by the Nine Rings, wielded terrible dark sorcery, and their Morgul blades struck poison and doom. For a time, the fight with Romestamo held even. Dewey faced Saruman across the ruinous floor. He struck faster and harder than Romestamo expected. "Avada Kedavra," he cried, and a green flash sped at Saruman. Saruman barely flicked a hand, and a slab of rubble rose to meet it. Spells and counterspells lit the wrecked tower in a staccato of dazzling, explosive light. The structure creaked and shuddered under the aftershocks. Saruman parried with ease, smiling a thin, mocking smile. "Your little tricks won't hurt me, black-robed boy," he taunted. "If you have nothing better, stay." He gathered power and hurled a massive, roaring fireball. Dewey threw up a shield charm, but the blast detonated like a charge of TNT, a fury greater than any blasting curse. Flames shot into the sky, and the tower's top was sheared off. Inside the concussion, a glowing golden ring materialized on Dewey's right middle finger, its magic expanding into an imposing barrier that protected Dewey, Romestamo, and Moreta. Saruman's eyes went hard when he saw it. "My ring," he spat through clenched teeth, and he attacked with renewed ferocity to tear it from Dewey's hand. The ring, however, had been charged by Dewey and its own power. It held fast. Dewey judged its reserve could keep the shield up for at least a day if its drain didn't accelerate. Dewey could not let the ring simply bleed out its power. He blew the horn again. The ringwraiths faltered. Even the fell beast reared and nearly unseated Saruman. Seizing the moment, Dewey let fly another killing curse. Saruman, already thrown off balance, tried to block, but the curse struck his mount. The fell beast died mid-flight and plunged toward the ground. Saruman, quick and wiry despite his years, leaped free and landed nimbly on the tower. Dewey did not hesitate. He slammed his staff into the tower floor while the ring's power surged through the shield. The shockwave ripped the already fragile structure apart. The tower fractured and collapsed. Screams and rubble cascaded down. Haradrim and orcs below who hadn't fled were crushed by falling stone. The magical shield cradled Dewey, Romestamo, and Moreta. Slowing their fall like a buoyant bubble, they drifted and landed gently. The ringwraiths, being incorporeal, were unaffected. Saruman, however, had fallen from great height and struck the broken ground hard. Hundreds of meters, yet he rose, hair and robe chalked with dust, barely bruised. Rage burned in his eyes. "Deweyer," he snarled, "this is your death." He lifted his staff to the sky. The heavens darkened, and a thick bolt of lightning answered his command. A column of raw, crackling energy aimed squarely at Dewey's shield. Electricity exploded against the golden barrier. It held, but the lightning sped the ring's depletion dramatically. The shield meant to last a day might fail within hours, perhaps less. Dewey's stomach clenched. If the ring died, so would they. He made a grim choice. He would try fiendfire, wild, corrupting fire, anything that might tear free the ward on apparition, or at least give them a way out. Dewey unleashed fiendfire. It roared across the city, consuming all flammable things and the panicked Haradrim and orcs in its path. The infernal flames coalesced into a terrible fiendfire dragon. Saruman snorted, flicked his staff, and threw out a magical shockwave that hurled the dragon aside. He intoned an old, terrible spell and summoned a tornado that grew fast, whipping up a blinding cloud of yellow sand. The cyclone sucked the fiendfire into its midst. The sand smothered the flames, and the dragon's form burned down until the fire guttered out. The sand itself became a weapon, needle-sharp grains that shredded the creatures caught in the tempest. Saruman steered that tornado toward Dewey. Dewey fought the suction, planting his feet and bracing the shield, but the force tore apart stonework and tore them from purchase. The shield and its three occupants were wrenched into the maelstrom. For a dizzy, chaotic moment, they were inside a spinning column of wind and grit, the shield buffeted by a hail of sand. Sounds blurred into a roar. Dewey felt like an ant inside a churning drum, tossed and turned, stomach rolling with nausea as the world spun and the shield took blow after blow from a rain of yellow sand. 229. Sauron's arrival. Dew was being thrown and spun through the air by the tornado and felt close to vomiting. Remistamo, think fast. Do you have a plan? He shouted, but the wind swallowed his words. Remistamo still held the weakened Moreta, but he heard Dewey. He did not answer aloud. His voice slid straight into Dewey's mind. You protect Moreta for a moment, then let me out of your magic barrier. I'll use everything I have to stop the tornado. Are you sure? Dewey cried. The storm's force was enough to tear a man apart, but Romistamo's resolve was absolute. Trusting him, Dewey released the barrier and let Romistamo go. Romistamo was snatched like a dead leaf into the gale, spinning in the tornado. Dewey watched in terror, then a faint, mysterious incantation threaded through the roaring wind. A blinding light erupted from the tornado's center, and a massive shockwave of magic exploded outward. The tornado was struck by unimaginable force and faltered. It split open, leaving a vast vacuum in its heart. In that void, Romistamo hovered, staff in hand, his blue robe shredding, his skin cut by countless abrasions. Without the tornado's support, he began to fall. Dewey hurried. Inside the weakened barrier, Moreta slumped but was still conscious. He dragged Romistamo back into the shield, and just before they hit the ground, cast a slowing spell that softened their descent. They landed gently enough, but there was no time to breathe. Saruman and the ringwraiths were already closing in. Give up the resistance, Dewey. Look at what you are, like a trapped beast thrashing in a cage, Saruman said, using his magical voice to throw suggestion into minds. But Dewey was no longer vulnerable. He had erected a mental fortress by occlumency. Saruman's hypnotic voice slid off his defenses. Dewey even lifted the horn of victory and blew. The blast neutralized Saruman's sonic magic. Saruman's face darkened. Remistamo planted himself and answered, Saruman, your opponent is me. He spoke aloud and at the same time sent Dewey a terse message. Dewey, I will hold Saruman and the others. You take Moreta and go. He grows weaker here. He must be taken away now. Dewey's heart froze. What about you? Remistamo's voice tightened. We cannot stay. I sense something worse approaching. The longer we remain, the harder it will be to leave. Take Moreta and go at once. Don't worry about me. After I hold them off for a while, I have a way to escape. Dewey hesitated. He could not believe Remistamo had a secret escape and would choose to stay behind. It looked like a sacrifice, but Remistamo would not wait for refusal. No time for hesitation, he urged. The danger is drawing near. If we delay, none of the three of us will leave. He glanced toward Mordor to the north, his face both terrified and solemn. He is coming. Hurry, take Morta and go. A distant commotion answered him. Remistamo's white steer came charging across the ruined plaza, trampling Haradrim and Orcs in its wake, and arrived at Remistamo's side. Remistamo set the weakened Moreta on the steer's back. Dewey, no, just go, he transmitted. If I'm captured, they'll make use of me. They will not kill me. You must take Moreta and find help to rescue me later. Then Romistamo turned without another look and hurled himself at Saruman, unleashing a full-power strike. Alone, he met Saruman and the ringwraiths and bought Dewey and Morta the chance to flee. Dewey's face shifted from panic to grim acceptance. He gathered Moreta and mounted the steer. Saruman sneered. Creating an opportunity for them? Don't be arrogant. None of you leave today. He poured all his power into suppressing Romistamo and snarled to the three ringwraiths, Stop them! As the White Wizard, Saruman was stronger than most. Despite Romistamo's desperate resistance, Saruman's pressure forced him back. The three ringwraiths swept toward Dewey and the steer's back. Dewey did not hesitate. He brought out the Starlight Fial, fed it with magic, and invoked the light of Arundel. The holy radiance drove the Nazgul back. Their wicked forms shrank from its purity. Dewey did not linger. He prepared to ride away with Moreta. For a moment, Saruman faltered, furious and surprised, but Romistamo kept him engaged. Their duel ripped through the fortress buildings of Minas Harad. Massive walls shattered and collapsed under the shockwaves. Haradrim and Orcs fled in terror. Then all sound stopped as if someone's hand had clamped over the world's throat. A suffocating pressure fell on the land. The wind died, and night thickened like ink. Voices of temptation and despair rose around them, millions of whispers, like slick worms seeking to worm into minds and devour souls. Even heartbeats seemed to slow under the weight. Moreta, slumped on the steer's back, shuddered, and whispered in a voice drained of hope. He has come. The duel between Ramastamo and Saruman froze. Saruman's face was conflicted, relief at reinforcements, anger at his earlier failure. Ramastamo's was pure terror and sorrow. Exhausted from his efforts, he forced himself toward Dewey and Morda to face whatever horror advanced. Darkness converged in the air, then split the sky, an enormous vertical rift like an eye tearing open. Shadows poured from its edges like living tentacles. From the rift stepped a figure of void and night, a faceless silhouette that swallowed the light. Only 2 points of scarlet glowed where eyes should be, cold and merciless. The 3 ringwraiths fell to their knees before the dark shape. Even Saruman bowed, unwillingly acknowledging a higher master. Sauron, Ramastamo breathed. Dewey felt the nearness of death as if for the first time. This was not the Great Eye alone. This was Sauron's true presence. The eye had been a symbol, a distant spirit form. This was his body, shadow given shape. White Wizard Saruman, Blue Wizard Morda, Ramastamo, and black-robed Wizard Dewey, the dark voice said, a sibilant whisper that slid into every ear. To gather so many wizards in one place is a surprise. Sauron's scarlet gaze roved over the 2 blue wizards. Morda, Ramastamo, old adversaries, for 1,000 years you have stoked chaos in the east and given me much trouble. Yet you have talent to hinder me from wholly ruling the east, and so prevent me from bringing all my strength to reclaim the west, shows you possess ability. Submit to me, and I will forgive the past. I can let you rule the east alongside me. What say you? His voice was temptation itself, 1,000 whispers probing for weakness, a corrosive presence seeking to pry open minds and rot them from within. Ramastamo clenched his mind shut and answered with anger. Do not dream we will serve you, Sauron, servant of Morgoth. You are a nameless, faceless nothing. You will fail. Is that so? Sauron mocked. But your friend does not seem so certain. Ramastamo turned. Morda's face convulsed, one instant clear, the next frenzied, as if 2 minds warred within him. Ramastamo grabbed his friend. Moreda, hold fast to your will. Do not let him take you. Moreda's eyes were torn. His exhausted mind could not withstand Sauron's corrosion. The shadow crept in. Ramastamo, kill me. Do not let me fall, he panted, more plea than request. Ramastamo could not slay his friend. Instead, he poured every ounce of spiritual and mental strength into a protective ward, shielding Moreda's mind against Sauron's corruption. Sauron watched and did not intervene. He welcomed it. Ramastamo was consuming his own power to save another. As Ramastamo weakened, the Dark Lord's task would grow easier. When Ramastamo's defenses finally failed, Sauron could break him and then corrupt and turn what remained. It suited the Dark Master perfectly. With Ramastamo thus occupied in draining himself, Sauron's attention turned to Dewey. His tone slid between mockery and curiosity. Dewey, an existence outside of destiny, always thwarting my plans. I have long been curious about you. Let us see what secrets make you so unusual. 230. Door-key facing Sauron's savage gaze and his assault of corrupting thoughts, Dewey maintained strict vigilance. His occlumency ran at full power, his mind a tightly fortified citadel that allowed Sauron no easy entrance. Still, Sauron's strength was enormous. The thousands of seductive whispers that filled Dewey's ears were like swarms of insects constantly gnawing at the citadel walls, probing for a weakness. Dewey's face went pale. The gap between them was too great. If this continued, he feared Sauron would breach his mental defenses. He dared not relax. Dewey activated the Ring of Power on his hand and shaped the strongest magical shield he could to protect himself, Ramastamo and Moreda. He burned the light of Erendil in his other hand to counter the dark current. The light could restrain shadow, but its efficacy depended on the wielder. Galadriel had once used it to repel Sauron at Dol Guldur. In Dewey's hands, it was only just enough to push back. Against Sauron's tidal darkness, it felt like a single candle in a gale, flickering, barely able to surround him. Sauron sensed the blockage and, intrigued, fixed his gaze on Dewey's hand. He ignored the ring's invisibility and stared directly at it with obvious surprise. Is this Saruman's ring? It has been improved, far more perfect than before, the Dark Lord thought, remembering the elven craftsman who once excelled at ringcraft. He looked at Dewey with appreciation and said, deceptively sweet, Wizard Dewey, you possess rare talent. If you stop resisting and join me, I will take you as my pupil. I will teach you to forge a ring like my own, granting you great power and the authority to rule beside me." Saruman watched with bitter jealousy. The ring he'd labored over was being treated as a prize to be offered to someone else. Sauron now promised to teach this young wizard the craft Saruman himself coveted. Saruman knew Sauron was not bluffing. The Dark Lord had discovered a real aptitude for ring forging in Dewey and wanted him as an apprentice. Before his fall, Sauron had been Ale's finest student. He was a master smith whose craft had produced the One Ring and the Rings of Power. The rings, though steeped in evil, were rare treasures worth coveting. Saruman, too, had studied Ale, but he was no equal in pure forging talent. He excelled in engineering, mechanics, and biological arts, not the subtle art of ringcraft. Even though Saruman had learned the basic ring-forging method, his results were inferior in Sauron's eyes. Neither Sauron nor Saruman knew that Dewey secretly possessed the Resurrection Stone and had called Celebrimbor, the master craftsman who had once forged the rings, to guide him. They simply assumed Dewey had improved the ring on his own. That misconception only made Sauron more eager to recruit him and made Saruman seethe. Dewey was unmoved. He sneered, "I will not become a puppet at your command, like your ring-wraiths." The offer had been tempting. A student of Sauron would be second only to the Dark Lord in power and could learn to forge a one ring of his own. But the price was surrendering his will and becoming a slave. That was a price Dewey would not pay. Sauron did not lose his temper. He chuckled as if watching a trapped creature thrash. "Very well. Your refusal now will change. I will bring you to Mordor. With time and enlightenment, you will join us." He unleashed a surge of dark power that hammered at Dewey's shield. The force was so great even Saruman took a step back in fear. Dewey, directly in the path of the attack, fought harder than ever. It felt as if a mountain pressed on his chest. Even with the ring's protection, Sauron's assault devoured his magic reserves like a flood. The shield that could have withstood Saruman's full-force assault for half a day now looked like it would hold for at most 30 minutes. Worse, Sauron's corrosive mental attack ignored the outward shield and kept burrowing at Dewey's inner citadel, trying to pry it open and seize his spirit. Dewey had no choice but to redouble his occlumency. He burned the light of Arundel, began to sing the magical music Tom Bombadil had taught him to fill his mind with joy, and called forth his Patronus. He stacked defenses layer upon layer, doing everything he could to keep Sauron from breaking through before the ring's magic ran out. For the moment, he bought himself some breathing room, but watching the stored magic in the ring melt away filled him with dread. Was this the end? Hogwarts check-in system, locating Harad, Minas Harad City. Check-in? The system prompt flickered into his mind. Dewey seized at the hope and shouted inwardly, "Check in! Check in now!" Check-in successful. Congratulations on obtaining a portkey. Relief flooded him. A portkey could save them. Because of the anti-apparition wards Saruman had put around the fortress, Dewey could not apparate free, but portkeys are enchanted objects and bypass anti-apparition measures. If he could learn the portkey charm in time and charge an object, they could be transported away. He pushed his mind to its limits, the invisible crown of wisdom enhancing his faculties as he absorbed the charm. The concentration required weakened his mental defenses slightly. Sauron felt the shift at once, sensing Dewey's spike of hope. The Dark Lord unleashed everything he had at the shield. Ripples ran over it, and every strike ate another chunk of the ring's magic. The estimated half-hour of endurance plunged downward. Dewey opened his eyes and acted. He cast the portkey charm on the crystal vial that held the light of Arundel. "Portus!" The vial shivered and glowed a faint blue. "Rumistamo, grab Moretta and hold the vial!" Dewey shouted. Rumistamo looked pale and hollow-eyed. He'd been using nearly all his strength to keep Morta's spirit from being polluted. Still, he found the last of his strength, clutched Moretta with one arm, and reached to touch the crystal vial with the other. Dewey, in the same instant, reached out and touched Romistamo's wild ox, his mount, so it too would be bound to the charm. A sharp tug ran up through them, like a hook snapping forward from behind their bellies. Their feet left the ground. The room spun. Before Sauron could smash the outer shield, the four of them, Dewey, Romistamo, Moretta, and the wild ox, vanished. Sauron's outrage was immediate. Duped and furious, he flung out a storm of power without restraint. An invisible force swept through Minas Harad fortress, and everything inside it broke apart. Countless Haradrim and Orcs and the great Oliphants were torn to pieces by that unleashed might. The Nazgul prostrated themselves in fearful obeisance, not daring to anger their master. Saruman gritted his teeth and braced himself on his staff, casting desperate wards, and looked on at Sauron with dread. 231. Horcrux. Thousands of miles away at Isengard, a shimmer of space opened and Dewey, Rimastamo, Moretta, and a white wild ox materialized outside Orthanc. Seeing the familiar stones, Dewey let out a long, shaky breath. He had escaped, at last. He stared at the ring of power in his hand. Its glow was all but gone, its stored magic spent. It had held the accumulation of more than half a year of effort, magic equivalent to the combined power of hundreds of himself, and Sauron's attacks had drained it dry. The loss stung. That power had been painstakingly gathered, and now he would have to begin again. The light of Arendelle in his possession had been largely consumed as well, reduced to a faint ember. Still, they had escaped Sauron and rescued the two blue wizards. That was luck enough. He looked to the others. Rimastamo, Wizard Moretta, are you all right? Rimastamo nodded, a tired smile on his face. I am. Thanks to you, we escaped. My visions are seldom wrong. You are our savior. Moretta, freed from Sauron's immediate mental assault, had returned to coherence, though he was too weak to speak. Most of his will was spent simply fighting to suppress the evil Sauron had left inside him. Rimastamo's face went tense with worry. Sauron had captured Moretta and used him as bait to draw Rimastamo out. His aim was not merely to kill, but to corrupt and bend them into servants, as he had corrupted others. Moretta, however, was almost a sub-divine Maya, with an exceptionally strong will, and even Sauron had found it difficult to break him. So Sauron had kept Moretta imprisoned in the tower at Minas Harad, subjecting him to years of torment designed to weaken his spirit until the dark influence could be forced in. Rimastamo could think of no way to free Moretta completely from that taint. Seeing the worry on his friend's face, Dewey suggested, "Perhaps we should take Wizard Moretta to Rivendell. Lord Elrond is the greatest healer in Middle-earth. He might have a way." At once Rimastamo's eyes brightened. "Then please, Dewey, make the introduction." The Blue Wizards had only once crossed paths with Elrond on their way east and were not well known to him, so they entrusted Dewey to arrange it. Dewey smiled and nodded. "I will. Lord Elrond is compassionate. It was he who suggested I go east to seek you. He respects what you have done there and will welcome you." He led Rimastamo and the weakened Moretta into Orthanc and prepared to use the fireplaces to travel to Rivendell. Inside the main hall, Rimastamo gaped at the enormous interior and then froze at the sight of a gigantic wolf, many times larger than his mount, the Aral cattle. It had 3 heads. The 3 faces sniffed, then snapped awake, teeth bared and small breaths of fire forming in their throats. "Quiet," Dewey barked. "Cerberus, these are guests. Behave." At the word, the 3-headed wolf immediately folded its aggression into a foolish, spoiled affection. It wagged its triple tail, stuck out all 3 tongues, and whimpered as if embarrassed. Dewey patted each head with one hand. "All right, I know. I have urgent matters. Playtime later." The beast obediently settled back to its post as a guardian. Rimastamo laughed, both amused and impressed. "Is this your pet?" Dewey nodded, a little apologetically. "Yes. His name is Cerberus. He's a variant 3-headed wolf, only a year old and not fully grown. He can be mischievous." Rimastamo only admired the animal, unbothered by its earlier threat. For one so young to show such strength, trained well, he might rival the divine hound Huan. Dewey shook his head. Huan was a legendary, unparalleled creature, the wolf that had fought Karkaroth and even forced Sauron to flee the Isle of Werewolves when Luthien rescued Beren. Compared to such a being, Cerberus was nothing. Dewey had no illusions. They did not linger in Orthanc. Dewey used the hearth, and they were soon in Rivendell. Elrond met them and asked quietly, "Did the journey succeed?" Dewey shook his head. "We found the location of Hildorian, but it only reveals itself on the first day of the new year, and I ran into trouble on the way." He told Elrond everything that had happened in the Far East. Elrond's brow tightened. "That was reckless. Sauron's power is vast. Had you been captured, you might have been lost, or your minds twisted." Dewey accepted the rebuke in silence. If not for a last-minute portkey, they might indeed have been seized or corrupted. They had been too confident. Once their business was settled, Dewey and Elrond went to the infirmary to see the two blue wizards. Elrond paid his respects and pledged to do what he could. Rumestamo's condition was poor, but recoverable, exhaustion and strain more than corruption. Morda, however, worried Elrond. He has endured great torment. He is physically and mentally exhausted. Part of his mind has been stained by Sauron's influence. There are dark spots on his soul. If his will had not been so firm, he would have already fallen. Dewey's face darkened. Rumestamo, panic rising, asked, "Lord Elrond, can you cure him?" Elrond looked sorry. "I cannot root out corruption of the mind entirely. Perhaps only in Valinor might a soul be cleansed fully." That answer sank Rumestamo. Return to Valinor was not something they could attempt. Their mission was unfinished, and the Valar's permission was not given lightly. Then Elrond continued, "I can, however, and seal the contaminated portion to prevent further spread. It will be a temporary ward. If the corruption is not purged, there will always be a risk." Dewey breathed a private relief. Rumestamo, grasping at the hope offered, asked Elrond to do it. Elrond first mended Moreda's physical wounds. Then, drawing on the power of Vilya, the Ring of Air, he sealed the tainted portion of Moreda's mind, isolating Sauron's influence. Elrond's skill as healer was precisely why he was called the greatest in Middle-earth. Moreda's strength returned enough for him to speak. "Thank you, Lord Elrond," he said solemnly. "Without you, I might have been lost to darkness." Elrond smiled, but his tone remained grave. "The seal is in place, but the influence remains. The closer you are to Sauron, the more the seal will be tested. I had to seal away some of your power as well. You must be prepared for that." Morda took it in with a brave smile. "This is better than I feared." He then turned to Dewey, eyes earnest. "You brought Rumestamo and me back from a terrible fate. Rumestamo has already given you the Horn of Victory, but it is not enough to show my gratitude. I have a gift for you." He described a golden bow he possessed, crafted by a Noldor artisan in Valinor and modeled after Romi's weaponry. It was said to strike true regardless of distance or concealment. Dewey, curious, accepted Morda's insistence, though he had yet to see this bow. While the blue wizards rested in Rivendell, Dewey traveled to Weathertop. He descended into the cellar vault and found Smaug half buried in his hoard of gold. The dragon brightened when he saw Dewey. "Master, you return!" Smaug slid a portion of his treasure aside, nervous that Dewey had come to demand payment. Dewey ignored the display. "Bring out my item." With a sulk, Smaug opened his maw and spat a round, black stone onto the flagstones. It was Dewey's palantir. Dewey wiped the dragon's saliva away with a little cleaning spell and took the orb. The palantir was not as it had been. A faint taint of dark arts clung to it, and a black mist churned within, showing Dewey's own face like a reflection. This palantir was Dewey's contingency, the vessel of a Horcrux. Before he had gone east, he had secretly sundered a fragment of his soul and bound it into the palantir. The stone was nearly indestructible. Short of weapons like Eglos or divine fire, there was no sure way to shatter it, so it made a fitting receptacle. Creating the Horcrux had cost him the life of an orc, but the reward was a last resort. Should he face death, this palantir could serve as the means to preserve and revive him. 232. Golden bow and silver arrows. Creating Horcruxes was not without a cost. Dewey had discovered that every time he cleaved off a scrap of his soul, a little of his reason went with it, leaving him more impulsive, more reckless. The botched rescue of Morda had been a warning. His carelessness had nearly cost him everything. That had been from splitting only a single fragment. If he were to follow Lord Voldemort's example and make 7 Horcruxes, Dewey could not imagine how much of his sanity would remain. He looked at the palantir he had used as a Horcrux and felt the prickle of caution. When he first made Horcruxes, he had even considered making several more for safety, using the Crown of Wisdom, the Golden Cup, the Resurrection Stone, or the Spear Eglos as vessels, but he had stopped himself. This palantir would be his first and only Horcrux. Still, he had to deal with the after-effects of an incomplete soul. The immediate remedy was symptomatic: soul stabilizers. A soul stabilizer was a potion used in their world to steady and mend a soul under severe shock or tearing. It was the potion Voldemort relied on, even commissioning Snape to brew batches for him. It did not heal. It merely suppressed the pain and confusion, keeping its drinker clear-headed and calm. True restoration required reintegrating the severed fragments with the original soul, an arcane process that demanded specific magic and, crucially, profound, sincere repentance. The ritual itself was excruciating. Who would tear their soul apart only to endure such agony to put it back together? Dewey certainly would not. Besides, he had slaughtered an orc in the process of making his Horcrux. He was hardly prepared to undergo the moral crucible of contrition for that. Meditation helped too, though painfully slowly. Deep spiritual practice could strengthen and mend the soul, but Dewey judged it would take a decade or more to make meaningful repairs. He planned, once he had gathered the salt of flesh and made the Philosopher's Stone to fix his lifespan, to remain in his lands until his soul healed. Meanwhile, he would, like Voldemort, rely on soul stabilizers. Brewing a soul stabilizer was difficult, a high-level potion whose ingredients were rare in this world. With Radagast, the Brown's help, and Elrond's guidance, Dewey spent 2 months hunting substitutes and finally brewed a batch. The potion glimmered like liquid silver. He drank a small vial and felt cool energy flood his head. The dull ache of a torn soul receded, and his mind sharpened. The restless, impulsive edge fell away, and he could think clearly again. He knew, however, this clarity was temporary. A single vial bought him about a month, and the full pot they had brewed would only stretch 3 months. He would have to brew more, regularly, if he was to keep the side effects suppressed. Time, though, was running out. The year was ending. Hildorian, the birthplace of men, would appear when the first sunlight of the new year touched the earth. He had to reach it before the dawn and enter the Valley of Slumber. There was no margin to spend on chasing ingredients for another pot. Among the Blue Wizards, Romestamo had returned to the Far East earlier. Using Dewey's portkey after he had confirmed his comrade's safety, he wanted to be home to guard against any opportunistic strike by Sauron while Dewey was away. Morda, worried for the East, recovered in Rivendell only briefly before ignoring Elrond's entreaties and heading back east himself. Because Moretta's staff had been taken, Elrond and Dewey, worried he would be defenseless, gave him the staff they had taken from Saruman. It was not the most comfortable staff for Morda, but it kept his hands from being empty. So at the end of it, Moretta's staff was in Saruman's possession, and Saruman's staff in Moretta's. A curious swap. After tying up the affairs at Weathertop and Isengard and saying farewell to Arwen and Elrond, Dewey touched the silver brooch on his chest and vanished. He reappeared in the Far East within a mountain forest, where Romestamo and Moretta waited with warm smiles. They were in a hilly range on the southern shore of the Sea of Rune, near herds of Arau cattle, descendants of Orome's steed. One of Romestamo's mounts grazed nearby. The small wooden hut they sheltered him in was one of the Blue Wizard's secret strongholds. After years of disputing Sauron's influence in the east, the two of them kept countless such refuges and moved between them constantly. Romestamo offered Dewey milk from the Arau cattle. The milk itself was magical. Long-term consumption greatly increased one's strength. Whole bands of Easterlings had once sought Arau herds to breed mighty warriors. The Arau were formidable animals, swift, powerful, and armed with 2 sharp horns that could fell lions and tigers, so they were prized and dangerous to capture. Dewey felt the strange nourishment seep into him. Though the Antdrots and other magics had already made his body nearly as resilient as an ordinary elf's, the milk's effect was still noticeable and promising for long-term gains. He even thought of rounding up a few Arau to bring back to Isengard after his mission. While Romestamo tended to him with milk, Morita fulfilled his promise. He produced a golden bow and set it in Dewey's hands. The bow looked forged of gold, yet was tough and flexible, its surface carved with intricate patterns and mysterious runes. Along with it came 3 silver arrows. "The bowstring is woven from the tail hair of Avala's steed," Moreta said. "The 3 silver arrows are meant for it." He explained that the bow had once carried 12 silver arrows. One was used in the Misty Mountains to fell an orc chieftain. Another dispatched a tyrannical Easterling king in the east. 7 more had been spent in assaults against Mordor. Only these 3 remained. The silver arrows, paired with the golden bow, fly true without need for sight, Moretta went on. They will strike their mark every time. They can travel incredible distances. If your will is strong enough, they can reach a target 1,000 miles away. Dewey's eyes brightened. A weapon that did not require aiming, one that could pierce the wind faster than the eye could follow, was a marvel. If only it could harm Sauron, he thought, he would loose an arrow straight at Mordor. The bow would also use ordinary arrows. They too would fly true, if not from such absurd ranges. Dewey accepted Moretta's gift and in return presented the two blue wizards with two sapphire brooches. They were portkeys. Tapping one 3 times would whisk the bearer straight to Isengard in an instant. The blue wizards appreciated such life-saving tools. Dewey did not linger. He bade farewell to Romestamo and Moretta and pressed on eastward, intent on reaching Hildorian before the new year's first sunlight. The two blue wizards remained in the far east, preparing to rally resistance. Reports from the Easterling tribes suggested Mordor had ordered large-scale mobilization. Sauron's forces were poised to retake the region in force. Romestamo and Moretta were already organizing the resistance to meet that threat. Dewey could not afford to worry about the political currents in the lands of the Easterlings. He rode his flying broomstick straight to the east. To avoid being noticed en route, he cast a disillusionment charm over himself and his broom, and so passed unseen over the greatest mountain range of the Far East, the Orocarni Mountains. The western slopes of the Orocarni were wildwood. Legend held that Cuiviénen, the birthplace of the Elves, once lay nearby, its spring and waterfall flowing into Cuiviénen Bay of the Helcar Sea. It was there the Elves first stirred and multiplied, splitting in time into the Vanyar, the Noldor, and the Teleri. The world had changed since then. Coasts shifted, rivers altered course, mountains reshaped, and Cuiviénen itself was lost. As Dewey crossed the ranges, he also spotted the dwarves of those peaks. 4 of the 7 dwarf lines traced their origins to these mountains. Here the eastern dwarves had awakened and prospered. Under Sauron's long dominion in the east, some dwarves had been corrupted into dark dwarves and clashed constantly with their kin for territories. The two blue wizards, Romestamo and Moretta, had worked across the east, allying with the mountain dwarves, the eastern elves, and some men to prevent Sauron from owning the entire region. Dewey pressed on. Following the route map Romestamo had given him, he pushed farther east. On the day before the new year, he reached the continent's easternmost point. Facing the rising sun, he looked out over an endless sea and down along a tranquil coastline. Perhaps because the Orocarni blocked Sauron's reach to the west, or simply because of the great distance, the influence of Sauron had not spread to this shore. It was a quiet, untroubled place of green mountains and clear waters, almost untouched. There were men here, but they resembled the Easterners. Dewey remembered more than the ruthless Easterlings. He did not disturb the inhabitants. Instead, following the map, he approached a long mountain range that rose in a semicircle from the sea like a great wall, its jagged peaks enclosed within. Those mountains trapped the moist breezes from the eastern sea and birthed up a perpetual mist that cloaked them in mystery. Only the strong easterly winds that came with the rising sun ever cleared it for a moment. For this reason, the range was called the Mountains of Wind. This was also the place Romestamo had marked as Hildorian, the birthplace of men. His map ended here. Only when the first sunlight of the new year fell on the Mountains of Wind could Hildorian be seen and the Valley of Slumber, the cradle where men first woke, be entered. "Guide me," Dewey murmured, and cast a guiding spell. A shaft of golden light sprang from his hand and vanished into the misty mountains. He followed the light into the fog. Where the mist was thick, he could not see his hand at arm's length. He summoned a whirlwind to drive the haze aside, but the fog flowed back like water through a break. He tried more spells, even calling up a tornado, but the mist seemed endless and inexhaustible. Magic could not dispel it. It became clear that something in the mountains interfered with his magic. A great, incomprehensible power warped sight, senses, and even the efficacy of spell work. Dewey searched thoroughly all day. Not a single gully was left unexamined, and yet he found no trace of Hildorian. By evening, he had to give up and wait for dawn. He pitched a small tent at the mountain's base and settled in for the night. From the outside, it looked a one-person shelter, but within he had placed an undetectable extension charm, 3 stories high, complete with living room, kitchen, bedchamber, and bathing room. He cast a muggle-repelling charm and a concealment charm about the tent, then entered meditation. He had not slept the previous night. His meditations now served both to strengthen him and to hasten the repair of the missing fragments of his soul. When he emerged from meditation, he felt the cold, clear mountain air on his face. A faint light already crept over the eastern sea. The sun would soon rise. Outside, Middle-earth was entering the Third Age, the year 2946. Dewey had been in that world for 5 years. He collapsed his tent with a flick of his hand and slipped it into his spatial bag, then waited silently for the first sunray. The horizon brightened little by little. When the sun finally edged up from the sea, a sudden wind rolled across the mountains and the mist thinned, revealing the silhouette of the range. As the sunlight touched the peaks, it was as though a veil were lifted. Above one particular valley, an arched band of color formed like a gateway. Dewey's heart leaped. He mounted his broom and flew toward it. He descended into the valley beneath the rainbow. Only a day before it had been an ordinary hollow. Now, under the arch, a faint, illusory scene shimmered like a mirage. As he approached, a clear breeze, scented and sweet, blew from nowhere. The fragrance relaxed him to the bone. His spirit rose, and his body felt safe and comforted, as if returned to the warmth of a mother's womb. He stepped forward into the mirage, and in an instant the valley changed. He stood in a bright, living valley sealed by mountain walls. Nightingales sang, flowers bloomed without pause, and a silver river ran from the depths over a bed of gold sand, jade, and agate, as if the stream had washed down treasures from upstream. Trees of many kinds bore sweet fruit, and everywhere the air hummed with a fine, almost holy vitality. Time seemed to have forgotten this place. Decay and age had no claim here. The very stones and water thrummed with a pure, sacred energy. Drawn by the fragrance, Dewey came to an apple tree and plucked a crimson fruit. He bit into it. Sweet juice flooded his mouth, and a hint of divine power slid into him. A comfort diffused through his soul, like parched earth meeting rain. The painful hollowness, where a piece of his soul was missing, stilled, and for the first time in a long time he felt relief. He ate greedily, as though stealing a joy he had been denied for lifetimes, and the sacred energy in the fruit made the gap in his soul crawl toward repair. The change was small, hardly more than a whisper of growth, but it manifested in his body and gave him hope. He had assumed that only long, patient meditation would slowly mend him over the next decade. He had not expected to find such healing in Hildorian. He recalled what Ramastamo had told him. Hildorian was the birthplace of men, the younger children of Iluvatar. Iluvatar had hidden that place, so the newly gifted men would wake undisturbed. Even the Valar could not find it until at the end of the years of the 2 trees, the sun rose from the west, and the valley began to reveal itself. Left by Iluvatar, the valley brimmed with sanctity. Its fruit trees were grown to feed the first awakened men, and they carried a trace of divine attribute. That was why their fruit could soothe and repair even a broken soul. Dewey stood among the trees, tasting more fruit, marveling at how a faint remnant of divine power could make such a difference. For a while he considered staying. This was a place of abundance and healing, more magically rich and beautiful than even Rivendell or Lothlorien. If it had not been so far from Weathertop, he might have been tempted to remain here always. Sated, he let himself digest the blessing and then pressed deeper into the valley. In its innermost hollow was where men had first awakened. There he hoped to find the last ingredient for the Philosopher's Stone, the salt of flesh. The deeper Dewey went into the valley, the more he admired its sacred beauty. It truly felt like the place Iluvatar himself had arranged for the awakening of men. Though he had never seen Valinor in the west, this must be something like it. At the valley's heart lay a jewel-toned lake, its bottom and shores strewn with golden sand and multicolored gems. If Smaug had seen it, he would have been delirious with greed. Carved into the mountain walls around the lake were man-made caves, the dwellings of the first awakened men. Even after untold ages, under the lingering touch of divine power, they looked as if people had lived there only yesterday. Dewey searched the caverns, but found nothing useful. "Where is the salt of flesh?" he muttered, frowning. For the philosopher's stone, he needed three primary substances: the mercury of spirit, the sulfur of souls, and the salt of flesh. He had already gathered the spirit mercury, the accumulated spiritual energy of the elves from Loon Bay in the Grey Havens, and the sulfur of souls, drawn from the tears of the dead among the ghosts on the paths of the dead. Elrond had told him that the salt of flesh did not mean literal flesh or ordinary salt, but a stabilizing, life-active substance. Yet Dewey found no obvious candidate. He turned his gaze to the lake. The water was incredibly pure, the sand and gems beautiful, but nothing seemed extraordinary. He scooped up a bowl and tasted it, sweet, cool, and instantly refreshing. Fatigue left his body and his limbs relaxed. The lake healed, but this was not the salt of flesh. Perplexed, he sat at the water's edge and thought. Elrond was wise and far-sighted. If he had said the salt of flesh would be found in the birthplace of men, it had to be true. Dewey absently brushed his hand through the grass. Moist soil clung to his palm. A spark of realization lit his mind. Of course, soil. In so many myths, men were shaped from clay. In Middle-earth, men awoke from the earth. Elven lore spoke of Ilúvatar's music and the birth of men and elves, their souls from the imperishable flame and their bodies arising in Arda, specifically Hildorian. Dewey dug up a clod. It was damp, fertile, and, most important, humming with life. The unremarkable soil was the source that nourished everything here. It was the salt of flesh. Extracting the active substance from soil, however, was difficult. Dewey set up a tent by the lake, took out a mithril crucible, and began work. He mixed the soil with lake water, added a separating potion, 3 deliberate drops, and stirred until it integrated. He let the mixture settle. The active life element dissolved into the water while the heavier earth sank. When the muddy water cleared, he filtered the solution with a golden sieve, returned the clear liquid to the crucible, and gently heated it. He stirred with his wand as the water evaporated until only a pale, shallow layer of white solid remained. It looked like salt, but it pulsed with vitality. Carefully, he scraped it into a crystal vial. Unable to resist, Dewey touched a single crystal to his tongue. A saline tang filled his mouth, and a surge of life uncoiled through his limbs, less like sudden strength than an expansion of life potential, a prolonging of existence. One crystal did little more than grant a momentary brightening of life, but it was real. He wanted to swallow the whole vial at once, but he controlled himself. The Philosopher's Stone, the path to true immortality, was still his goal. Even if he dissolved every particle of Hildorian's soil, the salt of flesh would not grant eternal life. He pocketed the vial and ate some of the valley's fruit, mindful that he still needed his soul to be whole. At that moment, the system pinged. Hogwarts Sign-in System, Hildorian located. Sign in. Sign in, Dewey said without hesitation. Sign in successful. Congratulations on obtaining the obscurial talent. Obscurial talent? Dewey froze. He remembered, when a witch or wizard suppresses their magic, it can form an obscurus, a parasitic, destructive magical entity that devours its host's life. Obscurials usually die young. The only famous example who survived into adolescence was Cadence, and even he died young. Was this a reward or a sentence? He checked himself carefully. There was no obscurus visible, no ravenous thing inside him, only a strange, rapid acceleration of his magical growth. His magic was increasing faster than it had when he first awakened. Without meditating at all, his power rose. With meditation, it doubled. It should have been welcome, but the specter of an obscurus made it a cause for anxiety. For now, however, no dark manifestation appeared. He shelved the worry and got back to work. Over the next month, Dewey labored every day, extracting salt of flesh from lakeside earth, eating the valley's fruits and drinking its water. He eventually filled a clear bottle with the snow-white crystals, but he found the precious life salts were concentrated only at the lakeshore, the place of men's awakening. Soil farther away held much less. The divine influence had faded with distance. He could have exhausted the valley's stores, but doing so would have ruined Hildorian. The ground he had tilled already looked ordinary. The flowers and trees it had once nourished would wither if he continued. He stopped. He used his magic to repair the patches he had worked, restoring the surface at least in appearance. Hildorian still bore a residual trace of Ilúvatar's power. If left alone, it might fade away entirely over ages. Dewey was not willing to let this cradle of men become a forgotten, ordinary hollow. Instead, he renovated the ancient caves, blending dwarven practicality and elven elegance, and he installed a proper fireplace, fearing the valley's divinity might block a flue network connection. Fortunately, the fireplace linked to those at Weathertop and Isengard. He also turned an old apple tree into a directional, reusable portkey. He intended to bind it to the white tree or the Maolong tree once he returned to Weathertop. The command would be simple. Circle the tree 3 times to the left and 3 times to the right, pat the trunk, and shout "Open" to teleport between trees. 3 months passed in Hildorian. He ate and preserved the remaining fruit with enchantments and prepared to take some back. The fruits, nourished by the valley's divine essence, steadily mitigated the side effects of his Horcruxes. His soul, battered and fragmented, began to repair. His temper cooled, his thoughts steadied. Perhaps when the last fruit was consumed, his soul would be whole again. With things in order, Dewey scattered a pinch of flue powder into the fireplace. "Isengard," he called. Green flames leapt up, enveloping him, and he vanished. Far to the north of Middle-earth, in the gray mountains beyond the Lonely Mountain, a desolate waste of ice and snow stretched where few men ever trod. Even here, year-round cold bit through cloak and bone. Yet on this day, a lone figure arrived, Saruman, riding a fell beast, bearing northward. Ice and rime blurred the sky. The wind was a blade that laid frost over the fell beast's hide. Frost rimed Saruman's brows and beard. His thin robes snapped in the gale and clung to his gaunt form, but he gave no sign of discomfort. His keen, cold eyes pierced the blizzard and fixed on a great snowbound peak ahead. The fell beast hesitated as they approached that nameless mountain, uneasy at something unseen. "Quiet, beast," Saruman snapped. The creature protested, but Saruman's voice hardened until it carried an irresistible compulsion. "Land at the mountain." Stiffened and subdued, the fell beast obeyed. Saruman left it shuddering on the snow, then strode into the mountain's heart, staff in hand. The winds there howled like a living thing, even harsher cold than the surrounding wastes whipped about him. This mountain never thawed. When the northern plains washed bare in summer, its heart remained an ice tomb. Saruman pushed through knee-deep drifts until a yawning glacial rift opened before him. A breath of frozen air blew outward, turning his exhalations to cloud. Frost thickened on his beard. His face stung red from the cold. Still he went on, deeper into the fissure, where the space widened and the wind grew keener and keener. Even he felt his strength touch its limit. A warm light at his staff's tip shielded him from the worst of the bite. At last the passage opened into a cavern, and there lay a head the size of a hall, an enormous dragon, eyes shut in deep sleep. With each slow exhalation, a gale of bitter cold streamed from its nostrils and spilled across the mountain. Its hide was black as night and furred with hoar. Even a single scale would dwarf a man. It radiated an ancient, terrible power. Long ago, Morgoth had made the race of dragons as a weapon to dominate the world. Some walked on 4 legs without wings. Others were winged, either on 2 legs or 4. Some breathed fire. Others exhaled cold that froze flesh and soul. There were monstrous exceptions, limbless serpents that crawled, lightning-shooting thunder dragons, light drakes that lashed forth beams of death, and ice dragons who breathed a winter so fierce it could wither armies. But these were rare. Among the better known were wingless fire drakes like Glaurung, the first of Morgoth's brood, and Encalagon the Black, the greatest of the winged. Both were instruments of ruin in the ancient wars. The dragon now before Saruman was not one of those famed fire drakes. It was a frost drake, a rare survivor of the War of Wrath, buried and later trapped within ice. Its name was Glamour. When it felt Saruman's presence, the old dragon's lids cracked open. Massive pupils, dark as voids, fixed on the intruder. Its voice, when it spoke, was a wind that cut. "Who disturbs the great Glamour's slumber?" Saruman did not flinch. He lifted his head and answered plainly, "I am Saruman the White. I have come to seek you out, eldest of living dragons." "A wizard?" Glamour's vast eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I smell the taint of the West upon you, the touch of those who serve the Valar. You may wear a borrowed guise, but you do not deceive my senses." The dragon reared as if to blast him with cold. Saruman set his staff and braced for the strike, yet before the breath could be loosed, he spoke quickly, his tone shifting to one of explanation rather than threat. That was once true. Now I serve in league with Sauron. I come with his offer. Is it Sauron who sends you? Glommer's cold gaze did not lessen. Saruman inclined his head and spoke at length. You have slept long in the far north. Perhaps you have not heard how Sauron has taken up Morgoth's mantle. He has seized the eastern lands and prepares to move west. Men and elves of the west resist stubbornly, and emissaries from the west, wizards in gray and brown, in blue and black, aid them. We would have you join us. Use your winter to spread an endless cold over the west. Aid us in uniting the continent, and Sauron will make you lord of the northern lands and grant you half the plunder of the world. Glamour snorted, contempt like sleet. Even my master, Morgoth himself, did not bend the world beneath him. How can this Sauron boast that he will finish what Morgoth failed? He may be a servant who learned to flatter, but he is no master of us dragons. Memories rose in the dragon's ancient eyes, and the voice that came now was edged with old fear. You were not there in that war. You cannot know it. The earth was rent apart, continents sundered, mountains shattered, seas heaved, fire leapt like rivers. The world was torn asunder, and countless of my kind were slaughtered. I stood when Beleriand sank. I saw the furious sea swallow dragon upon dragon. I was fortunate. When the waters rose, I breathed forth a blast of cold and froze the sea about me. The ice took me and carried me north. I was cast upon the farthest shore and trapped within ice, and I have lain in this mountain since that day. So from then I swore I would leave no more, it finished. Saruman had not been present in those ancient wars either. He was a Maya who had not fought at the height of the first conflicts. A flicker of disdain crossed his features. Glommer was, he thought, a dragon still trembling from the past. But he pressed on, unwilling to abandon his purpose. There is another matter of dragons, he said. You will have heard that a dragon called Smaug has been tamed and made a mount. Impossible. Glommer's snort was a gale. We answer only to our Maker. No man, no Maya, no lord beneath the sky may bind us. It happened. Saruman's voice was cool. A black-robed wizard, Duier, subdued Smaug and rides him. He has traveled through the lands and has been called Lord of Dragons for his deed. Lord of Dragons? Glommer laughed, a sound like gravel pouring downhill. Only Morgoth is worthy of such a title. A wizard who thinks to call himself Lord? Ridiculous. Its contempt smothered the rest of the conversation. If you have nothing but idle words, leave me to my sleep. That insolence stung Saruman. He had come far and would not be dismissed. He drew on a power of voice older and subtler than mere argument, the persuasive art he hid beneath his smooth speech. His tone became silk and ice, a lure shaped to the dragon's hungers. Glommer, Lord of Frost, he murmured, each syllable laden with suggestion. Do you mean to lie here wasting your breath in this frozen tomb? Come with me. Link your power to ours, and I will set the world beneath your chill. I will make your name blaze with the renown of old. None shall forget Glommer, as they remembered Glaurung or Uncalagon. You will be the very shape of winter and death. The west will tremble when your cold comes. Saruman's voice touched whatever resentments and desires still throbbed beneath the dragon's frozen pride. Glommer's great eyes glazed as the enchantment struck into the old wound of loneliness and the hunger for dominion. A crack in its ancient will opened, and Saruman seized the chance to press his control. Saruman's face broke into a triumphant smile as Glaurung seemed about to fall completely under his spell. In the next instant, that smile vanished. Glaurung's eyes clouded with struggle, and with a terrible wrench, it snapped free of the wizard's enchantment. You're courting death, the dragon roared. The glaciers trembled as its vast body reared and ice avalanched in great sheets. It threw back its head and exhaled a blast of absolute cold. The very air around them seemed to begin to freeze. Saruman's expression tightened. He planted his staff and flung up a pale shield of light. The cold slammed into it, condensing into thick rime. The shield began to fracture like fragile ice under relentless pressure. Saruman did not wait to test it further. He wheeled his mount and fled from the glacier's mouth. Glaurung would not let the one who had tried to enslave him go. It rose, every muscle churning, intent on hunting down the wizard who had dared to touch it. The mountain quaked, great fissures opened, and an unprecedented avalanche thundered down. Saruman burst from the crevice and, with a frantic command, summoned a fell beast. The beast leapt into the air just ahead of the crushing snow and ice, narrowly avoiding death. With a titanic scream, a black dragon, its length measured by thousands of meters, shattered free of the glacier and swept the mountaintop. This was a creature of such bulk it dwarfed Smaug tenfold, a living mountain of scales that radiated an oppressive, suffocating presence. Glorung spread its giant wings and lashed them, whipping up a blizzard, then surged after the fleeing fell beast. It bit and struck at Saruman as the terrified mount tried only to flee. Saruman twisted in the saddle and cast a fireball with his staff. The blast struck the pursuing dragon, but left no lasting mark. Glorung's hide shrugged it off. The chase streaked across the northern wastes. Though enormous, the dragon was agile and far faster than the fell beast. With a single powerful wing beat, it closed the distance, opened its cavernous maw, and expelled a concentrated bone-freezing gust aimed at Saruman and the beast. Saruman's face went pale. He flung up a blinding ward to intercept the cold. The shield took most of the blast, but what leaked through struck the fell beast. Its wings and lower body stiffened, armor turning to ice. With a keening cry, the fell beast plunged earthward, dragging Saruman with it. Saruman clung to the beast and used it as a cushion. He survived the fall, badly shaken but alive. The fell beast crashed upon a crag and gave weak, dying cries. Glorung descended amid wind and sleet, looming over the shivering wizard like a storm. It peered down at the tiny figure and mocked, "Where can you run now, wizard? I am hungry. I will make a snack of you and your mount." With a single bite, it snapped the wounded fell beast in two and swallowed it. Then it fixed its hollow, predatory gaze on Saruman and opened its terrible fangs. Suddenly, it swayed, unsteady. "What?" the dragon rumbled, dizziness clouding its mind. It shook its head, alarm sharpening into recognition as it saw Saruman's smug face from below. "You! What have you done?" Saruman straightened, triumphant. "I hid a vial of poison inside my mount," he said. "Not any poison, one drop of Ungoliant's venom." Ungoliant was an ancient, monstrous thing, a giant spider spirit born in the void beyond Arda, whose hunger and malice had once rivaled Morgoth's. She had conspired with Morgoth in the dark days and in one of her greatest crimes, sucked the sap from the two trees of Valinor, poisoning them so that they withered and the light was lost. Ungoliant's venom was such that it slew the trees. Even a dragon of old blood would be vulnerable to it. Glorung reeled and tried to answer with another blast of cold, but the poison took hold. Its great limbs weakened, its breath came shorter. The dragon's resistance collapsed and it fell prostrate, eyes clouded with fury and loss. Saruman lowered his ward and stepped forward, smiling at the mountain of scales below him. He pictured the power he would gain if he could raise this dragon to his command, an instrument more terrible than any mere army of Uruk-hai, a living storm that could make Isengard secure and further his ambitions. Yet the thought of Sauron checked him. Both were Maiar, but Sauron's authority was greater. Saruman still served under Sauron's dominion and dared not usurp his master openly. He unrolled a small object from the sleeve of his robe and drew closer. It was an iron crown, black as obsidian and cold as shadow. Glorung watched with failing strength as Saruman set the crown upon the dragon's brow. The moment it touched the scales, it seemed to sink in and root itself, growing and reshaping until it matched Glorung's vast head. Dark runes and a malevolent, ancient aura flared from the band. This was no ordinary circlet. It had once been Morgoth's iron crown, the very crown into which he fastened the three Silmarils. In the dark wars that followed, the Silmarils had been taken and the crown stripped of their light. Later, Sauron claimed and reforged the iron crown for his own. Now, wearing that crown, Glorung felt a foreign will press into him. Sauron's will and malice bled through the metal, the crown clamped like a second skull, and Sauron's shadow filled the dragon's eyes. Glorung's struggles faded. A black haze crept over its mind until it was empty of its own thought. When it rose again, it moved with the machine-smooth obedience of a puppet. Its hollow gaze fixed on Saruman, and in a voice not wholly its own, Sauron spoke through it. "Well done, Saruman. Return to me and I will grant you leave to reforge a ring in Mount Doom." Saruman's face broke into greedy delight. Mount Doom, fire from the earth's core, a forge of terrible power. A ring forged there would be mightier than any he could make elsewhere. He could not yet hope to remake the One Ring, perhaps, but this promise gleamed like the height of his ambition. Quickly he mounted the enslaved dragon. Glorung spread its 1,000-meter wings and rose, a black canopy against the sky, stirring cold and snow as it flew. From the far north, it bore Saruman south. The dragon swept over the gray mountains, passed between the Lonely Mountain and the Iron Hills, and skimmed the eastern reaches of Mirkwood, heading toward Mordor. Wherever the dragon passed, a frost rode the winds behind its wings. Winter reached down to the valley floors beneath those clouds. The dwarves of the Lonely Mountain and the Iron Hills felt the sky darken and the air drop in temperature. But seeing only a gloom overhead, they had no sure way to find its source. Thranduil of Mirkwood and Galadriel of Lothlorien both frowned and turned their gazes to the eastern horizon, feeling a vague and troubling stirring, but the impressions were faint and offered no clear answer. Dewey, for his part, remained unaware of these events for the moment. He had returned to Isengard to confirm his defenses and then rewarded the Griffons and the Cerberi who patrolled Orthanc. Afterwards, he crossed again to the far side of the Misty Mountains, to the dragon farm he had created long before. The farm lay hidden by enchantments, sealed away from the world as if it were a pocket of reality all its own. From the outside, or even from the air, the wide patch of missing forest gave up no clue to what lay beneath the spell. Within, over a dozen wyverns roosted and hunted. The largest exceeded 10 meters in length, far from Smaug's terrible scale, but still fearsome. Their scales would not yield to ordinary blades. Their breathers could melt steel. They were dangerous and not very clever. Wyverns did not speak as dragons did, and they had sharp tempers, made harder to tame by their quick aggression. Dewey's solution was simple. He entrusted them to Smaug. The great dragon's presence and bloodline dominance were enough to bring the wyverns into line. At the first sight of Smaug, their stubbornness wilted. Any defiant wyvern that raised itself against him was quickly humbled until it slunk away with bowed head. Smaug needed only to visit the farm once a year to remind them who was king, and they remained subdued and watchful the rest of the time. 237. Crafting the Magic Stone. At the dragon farm, besides the wyverns, there was a large herd of cattle, sheep, and horses, and over a dozen wargs and orcs who had fallen into Dewey's hands. The livestock existed to feed the wyverns. The wargs and orcs, kept under Dewey's control by the Imperious Curse, were assigned to tend the herds and care for the wyverns. If any of them ended up as rations, Dewey, ever the capitalist, felt little remorse. There were plenty more wargs and orcs in the Misty Mountains to capture. Dewey went straight to the very first wyvern hatched on the farm. Crossbred from Smaug's blood and a giant lizard, it was covered in black scales, with yellow eyes, bronze horns, and a spiked tail. More like a giant winged lizard than a traditional dragon. Wyverns grew incredibly fast. In a week, they could triple in size. In a month, reach the size of a small house, and by 1 year of age, they could fly and measure over 10 meters. Number 1, as Dewey had named it, had just killed a wild ox. Its sharp teeth had snapped the ox's neck. The rest of the herd scattered. Number 1 did not tear into the carcass raw. It breathed dragon flame over the meat until the scent of cooked meat filled the air, then began to feast. When Dewey approached, the wyvern roared and guarded its meal, but he ignored the warning. He had not bound these wyverns with magical contracts. They were kept under Smaug's general suppression instead. He bred them for their parts: dragon liver for advanced potions, scales for defensive items, blood for myriad uses, hide for protective clothing. And he didn't want sentiment to get in the way, so he avoided formal bonds the way he had with the three-headed wolf and the griffin. When Number 1 prepared to breathe fire at him, Dewey simply cast the Imperious Curse. Wyverns inherited strong magical resistance from Smaug, far surpassing ordinary dragons of the magical world. Basic curses like Stupefy and Petrificus didn't faze them. Their one notable weakness was comparatively low resistance to mental magic, which made the Imperious Curse effective. Under its influence, Number 1 stopped and stood obediently. Dewey walked up with a sharp needle and a massive mithril syringe. Finding a gap between scales, he plunged the needle into the beast and drew out dragon blood, about a barrel. He repeated the process across the farm, drawing barrel after barrel from wyvern after wyvern, as if it were nothing. When the wyverns looked noticeably anemic, he ordered the orcs to bring more cattle and sheep to help them recover. With the dragon blood collected, Dewey returned to Weathertop and to Hogwarts' alchemy chamber. On the work table lay the three primal substances: the mercury of spirit, the sulfur of souls, and the salt of flesh, alongside the fresh dragon blood. He had prepared a mithril furnace and a double-necked sealed glass retort engraved with runes to prevent energy leakage. These ingredients, plus the four classical elements, earth, air, water, and fire, were required to make the Philosopher's Stone. Air, fire, and water he could call upon, thanks to the help of Elrond, Galadriel, and Gandalf, each a bearer of an elven ring. For earth, he opened another box. The Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain, gleamed inside. As the essence nurtured by the earth, it provided the element of earth and completed the quartet. Dewey also unfurled an astronomical scroll he had taken from Saruman's library. The scroll recorded Middle-earth's astronomical phenomena. With it, he could chart the constellations for the coming days and align the stone's creation with the proper astrological conditions. Crafting a Philosopher's Stone was fiendishly complex. Beyond the materials, it demanded precise timing, special incantations, and intricate magic circles. Nicholas Flamel had spent 21 years on his stone, years that included research, decoding the Book of Abraham, and gathering rare materials. Dewey's copy of the Book of Abraham already contained Flamel's interpretations, saving him the time of deciphering. Elrond had directly pointed him to locations for the mercury of spirit, sulfur of souls, and salt of flesh. The three elven rings could gather the elemental forces. He had access to places Flamel never did: Loon Bay of the Grey Havens, the Paths of the Dead, Hildorian, so he skipped the most arduous parts of Flamel's collection. Flamel had, during the Black Death, spent 7 years extracting spiritual energy, soul power, and life force from the plague's dead to distill his three primals. The scale and horror of that method made the task practically unrepeatable. Flamel's success was uniquely tied to that desperate era. Even with shortcuts, the actual refinement was unforgiving. A single mistake could destroy all the painstakingly gathered mercury, sulfur, and salt. Dewey meticulously calculated the year's astrological patterns and accounted for weather. Clouds or fog at a crucial moment would ruin the ritual. He visited Rivendell and Lothlorien, leaning on Elrond's wisdom to verify his charts and using Galadriel's mirror to glimpse future skies. Satisfied, he began. He sealed the mercury of spirit, sulfur of souls, and salt of flesh into the retort in equal proportions, 1:1:1, and placed it in the mithril furnace. The mercury's silver sheen, the sulfur's yellow, and the salt's white mixed within the double-necked vessel, forming the Trinity. Dewey used the dragon blood as fuel. It burned a roaring blood red, accelerating the reaction. The fire had to burn continuously for 49 days. Fortunately, Dewey had stored more than a dozen barrels of dragon blood, enough to sustain the blaze. Day after day, he tended the furnace, replenishing the dragon blood and keeping the heat steady. He ate fruit from Hildorian's valley and drank from a golden cup when thirsty. More important, he meditated continuously, projecting his spiritual energy to perceive every subtle change in the retort. Inside it, in his inner vision, a miniature cosmic evolution unfolded. The three primals intertwined, then began to coalesce into a triangular circulatory body, uniting spirit, soul, and matter. As he observed, Dewey felt his own spiritual power expand. The mental stronghold he was building, the spiritual castle, grew larger and more fully formed, stepping toward a complete likeness of Hogwarts within his mind. On the 21st day, the mixture inside the retort completed its first transformation. The three primal substances had merged into a black, viscous mass. The vessel gave off a foul odor and carbonized smoke, the appearance of failure. Dewey did not panic. The Book of Abraham named this stage Crow's Head, the Negredo. It meant he had finished the first phase of the work. The next phase, the Albedo, or White Rose stage, would require purifying and sublimating the substance to obtain the primary white stone. Having completed the first stage of creating the Philosopher's Stone, Dewey paused. To turn the black stone into a white one required the precise moment when Mercury appeared in the sky. In Middle-earth Mercury, Ellenmere, shows itself 3 times a year, but the exact dates vary. Duir had to consult the astronomical scrolls in Orthanc and ask Elrond to pinpoint this year's appearance. Elrond estimated that the first appearance would be on March 8th, which was very near. Before Mercury rose, Duir went to Lothlorien through the fireplace to ask Lady Galadriel for aid. The second stage of the stone's refinement required her help, indeed, the power of the Ring of Water, Nenya, which she wore. Galadriel already knew Duir had been working on a philosopher's stone. When he requested help, she readily agreed. She was a fellow member of the White Council, and the matter touched Arwen's future as well. Galadriel would not see her granddaughter, whom she had raised, give up immortality lightly. So Galadriel accompanied Duir back to Orthanc with Arwen at her side. Saruman had turned Orthanc into a wizard's tower, a place where magic was amplified, ideal for delicate transmutation. On Orthanc's top platform, Galadriel and Arwen took their places at the edge, watching quietly. Duir drew a 7-pointed star array in dragon's blood to contain the transmutation's energies and prevent them from dissipating. Mercury does not appear at midnight like some stars. It rises at dusk or dawn. Before dawn on March 8th, Elenmere rose in the east, even before the sun. As starlight struck Orthanc, Duir activated the 7-pointed array. Galadriel lifted her right hand. Nenya flared in her palm, a brilliant, pale radiance. The water elements between heaven and earth seemed to answer her call, condensing into a pale blue torrent that streamed into the star array. Above, Mercury itself seemed to respond, projecting a column of blue starlight straight into the circle, like a heavenly pillar descending to meet their workings. On the lonely mountain, King Thorin Oakenshield watched the pillar of light to the southwest. "What is that place?" he asked. "Your Majesty, it's near Isengard," his dwarf answered. "It was once Saruman's territory. Now it belongs to Duir, the black-robed wizard." Thorin's face shifted. He stared at the towering pillar for a long time without speaking. Far to the east, in Mirkwood, Thranduil and Legolas also noticed the starlight. The woodland realm had cleansed most of the giant spiders and reclaimed the forest. The old forest road had been restored, and the realm renamed the Great Greenwood. From its paths one could reach Lake Town to the east, Dale and the kingdom under the mountain, Bjorn's house to the west, or even cross the ford and traverse the misty mountains toward Rivendell. "Is Duir channeling a star?" Legolas said, eyes bright with admiration. "He channeled Lumbar and Helluin before, now Elenmere. He is extraordinary." The elves' first sight on awakening had been the stars. They revered and loved their light with an instinctive devotion. Thranduil nodded, pleased, and advised his son, "Duir is no ordinary man. I cannot say what his fate will be, but I do know he will not be mediocre. Legolas, keep him as a friend. It will serve you and the woodland realm well." Legolas bristled at the calculation. "Father, Duir is my friend. Whether he becomes great or not does not change that." He drew his wand, and with a flick, a radiant silver elk Patronus sprang forth. Huge, with broad palmate antlers like Thranduil's mount. The elk moved gracefully through the trees, nuzzled Legolas, and he stroked it fondly. "This Patronus charm was taught to me by Duir," Legolas said. "It is the embodiment of my spirit, my will to protect the woodland realm, you, father, my people, and my friends. If my duty were ever clouded by calculating self-interest, my spirit would falter and my Patronus would leave me. I do not wish to be a man who always weighs gains and losses. Just as your love for mother endures, so will my most sincere devotion be to you, my people, and my friends." Thranduil watched the elk Patronus and felt both pride and relief. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You have grown, Legolas. Perhaps our old ways do not fit everything anymore. Do as your heart tells you." Legolas smiled, glowing with approval. In Mordor, far to the west, Sauron saw the projected starlight as well. His great flaming eye atop Barad-dûr turned toward Isengard, and he touched a palantir, trying to pry into Orthanc's workings. But Galadriel was present in the tower and sensed his probing at once. Using the Elenmere light drawn into the array, her eyes blazed with starlight, her pupils glowing white. She fixed her gaze into the void as though casting a judgment, her power forming a radiant prison across the void to meet Sauron's eye. "Sauron, servant of Morgoth, this is no place for your spying. Your sight ends here," she intoned. Barad-dûr felt the blow as if it struck the eye itself. The Palantir's influence faltered. "Galadriel!" A voice from Barad-dûr snarled, edged with anger and resentment. Nearby, Saruman stared at the pillar of light toward Isengard, green with jealousy. That had been his dominion. Now it was occupied by another, and he had been displaced. He seethed. "Soon," he muttered, "I will take Isengard back. Duir, Gandalf, Galadriel, Elrond, soon you will feel my wrath." Saruman turned then to the experiments in his laboratory. Before him lay dozens, more than 100, of eggs of various shapes and sizes. Some were the result of mixing dragons with fell beasts. Others blended dragon blood with Mordor's dark giant lizards or with the great Titan pythons. The eggs thrummed with a malignant aura. Sauron had planted evil spirits into each egg, just as dark spirits once took hold of wargs. When hatched, these creatures would be fierce and wholly under his sway. As their maker, Saruman claimed control of the wyverns, second only to Sauron himself. "How long until these eggs hatch and are battle-ready?" Sauron's shadow asked as it appeared in the lab. "A few months to hatch," Saruman answered confidently. "They grow quickly, mature in 3 years. We will have a winged host by then." Sauron was not satisfied. "That is not enough. Breed more eggs. I want a wyvern army that can sweep every force aside, and I want the time shortened." At his command, a vast, dark power poured from Sauron into the eggs. Their evil deepened. The very passage of time seemed to quicken. The eggs cracked sooner than expected, shells shattering as hideous wyverns spilled forth. 3 main breeds emerged. The most powerful were hybrids of dragons and fell beasts. Pitch black, almost dragon-like in might, though bare of scales. They did not inherit the true dragon's cold breath, but they had the fell beast's terrifying sonic attack. Their scream could disorient, nauseate, and unnerve foes. These stood on 2 legs with great bat-like wings and were nearly the equal of true dragons. Next came dragon giant lizard hybrids, 4-legged, 2-winged beasts that looked like winged lizards. They could fly, but had no cold breath. Instead, their bite carried venom that sapped strength and brought death, deadly predators in their own right. Finally, dragon titan python hybrids slithered forth. Wingless and legless, their bodies were sheathed in dragon-like scales and crowned with rows of sharp spines running down their backs and tails. They had neither cold breath nor venom. They were enormous, relying on crushing power and sheer size to destroy prey, the largest of the 3 hybrid types. Sauron's investment had borne dreadful fruit. As the new wyverns flexed their wings and tested their claws and fangs, Saruman's eyes glittered with cruel anticipation. An army was taking shape beneath the shadow of Barad-dûr. 239. Soul Transformation. Sauron and Saruman were both somewhat disappointed that the wyvern hatchlings, though born from Glaurung, had not inherited his frost powers. Still, with over 100 wyverns hatched, they were satisfied with the sheer numbers. Even more troubling for their enemies, these wyverns were inhabited by evil spirits, which made them smarter and far more dangerous than ordinary wyverns. They could understand complex commands, think and plan to some degree, and cooperate with one another. The newly born dark wyverns, their eyes glinting with malice, immediately bowed when they recognized Sauron as their master. Sauron nodded, pleased by their intelligence, then turned to Saruman and ordered, "Breed more wyverns as fast as you can. I will use dark arts to accelerate their maturation. In less than a year, they will be ready for battle. By then, we can unleash a wyvern host to strike Rohan and Gondor and help you take Isengard back." Saruman's joy at the thought of reclaiming Isengard and exacting revenge on Theoden, Gandalf, and others was plain, but his expression soon clouded. He frowned and asked, "Why the rush? You're even willing to force their growth with your power." "You have always said to accumulate power slowly," Saruman added. "Why attack Rohan and Gondor now, and why help me reclaim Isengard so urgently?" To Saruman, Sauron had always been patient and calculating, corrupting Numenor, posing as Anatar to trick the elves into forging the rings. This sudden haste was out of character, and it made him uneasy. Sauron did not hide his purpose. "My target is not Rohan or Gondor," he said. "It is Isengard." "Isengard? Why attack there?" Saruman demanded, incredulous. He could hardly believe Sauron's promised aid. Sauron was never altruistic. If he wanted something at Isengard, he would have acted sooner. Sauron answered with a startling revelation. "I have a premonition that something will be born there that can help me reshape my form." "Could it be the One Ring?" Saruman blurted. The only thing he could imagine that might restore Sauron's physical form was the One Ring. In the Second Age, Sauron had been destroyed with the fall of Numenor, and yet returned, in part, by means of the ring. Sauron pictured the scene at the end of the Second Age and the loss suffered when Isildur cut the ring from Sauron's hand. Sauron shook his head, his voice full of longing and urgency. "It is not the One Ring. It is a treasure not yet fully born. The starlight projection at Isengard will complete it. Although Galadriel has denied me sight there, even a single glimpse revealed enough for me to see it." He described what he had foreseen. "A red gem, brimming with immortal power. I have a premonition. It can grant me a permanent physical body, restore my strength, and even let me sense the One Ring directly." Saruman found it hard to believe, yet as a fellow Maya, he knew their intuitions were seldom wrong. Sauron looked westward toward Orthanc, as if he could already see within, and his voice hardened. "We must obtain that treasure when it is born, at any cost." On the summit of Orthanc, at Isengard, the starlight of Elenmere, Mercury, streamed down like a pillar, projecting into the seven-pointed star array and drawing a steady flow of stellar energy. That energy poured into the mithril furnace where, under the burning fuel of dragon blood, it reacted with the crow head in the flask. With the added stellar power, the flames in the furnace strangely cooled to a freezing intensity, still fiercely burning, yet emitting a biting chill. Galadriel had also invoked the power of Narya, the Ring of Water, feeding water elements into the furnace. The black substance in the flask absorbed the union of Mercury's power and water, slowly crystallizing into a white powder. A delicate, jasmine-like fragrance began to escape the flask despite its seal. When Dewey inhaled it, a profound calm washed over him. His soul felt nourished. The wounds the Horcrux had left in his soul began to mend. The effect was deeper even than the fruits of Hildorian. It worked directly on the soul, allowing it to regrow. Dewey drank in the scent with relief. The fragrance was contained within the seven-pointed array, so nothing could be wasted. The appearance of Elenmere was brief, less than 2 hours, but the array had drawn enough of Mercury's power that it continued to shimmer with starlight even after the planet faded. Under the dragon blood's refining heat, the flask's contents kept producing more white crystals, and the jasmine scent grew thicker. Dewey absorbed it and felt his soul visibly strengthen, but with that restoration came an onslaught of desires. It was as if a voice from the depths of his heart tempted him to open the furnace, take out the flask, and breathe in more to make his soul ever more powerful. Outside the array, Arwen saw Dewey's brow crease and grew worried. "Grandmother, what's wrong with Dewey?" she asked. Galadriel shook her head. "The making the Philosopher's Stone is itself a trial. He is undergoing a soul transformation and must resist the temptations of greed in his heart to succeed." "How long will it take?" Arwen asked. "It will take until the black substance has fully transformed into white. Only then will this stage be complete," Galadriel replied. Days passed. The black in the flask gradually turned to white. The fragrance intensified, and Dewey had to withstand ever stronger inner urges. Without Galadriel sustaining him with Narya's power, he would have collapsed from exhaustion or hunger. Finally, after 21 days, a rich perfume burst forth from the furnace. The aroma filled the seven-pointed array, making Dewey feel as though he stood in a sea of jasmine. It penetrated his soul, which swelled and mended. The part of his soul lost to the Horcrux was completely restored. Dewey once again possessed a whole soul. Yet the blessing carried a cost. Menacing desires surged from within, trying to overwhelm his will and turn him into a slave of appetite. This temptation was not an external corruption like Sauron's. It was the magnification of Dewey's own inner wishes. He could not defeat it by ordinary means. He could only hold it at bay by sheer force of will. Dewey practiced occlumency, donned the crown of wisdom, and sank into deep, continuous meditation to preserve his sanity. When the flask's black substance had wholly become white, the fragrance abruptly ceased. Dewey opened his eyes, extinguished the dragon blood flames, and with bare hands removed the double-necked flask. Neither furnace nor flask felt hot after so long. Instead, both exuded a bitter, chilling coolness. Within the bottle, a silver light shimmered, and the white powder looked like condensed starlight. A faint jasmine scent still lingered. This was the second stage of the Philosopher's Stone, the albedo, the white rose stage. At this point, the white stone could heal and cure, though it could not yet transmute base metals into gold. Congratulations, Dewey. Your Philosopher's Stone is halfway there, Galadriel said with a smile. Dewey bowed in gratitude. Thank you, Lady Galadriel. Without your help, I fear I might not have completed this stage. Galadriel had stood by him the entire time, drawing water elements with Narya and lending essential aid. And congratulations on the purification of your soul, she added. Dewey's face lit with joy. After the albedo stage, his soul was not only whole again, but had grown significantly. Where his soul strength had once been only slightly above a mortal's, it now rivaled that of elves such as Arwen and Legolas. The elves had taken millennia to build such souls. Dewey had achieved comparable power in just 21 days, aided by the Philosopher's Stone's transformation. No wonder Nicholas Flamel, unknown before creating the stone, had become a renowned grand wizard afterward. The process itself brought a spiritual and soulful ascension. Arwen noticed the exhaustion in Dewey's eyes and admonished him gently. Dewey, you haven't slept properly in almost a month. The Philosopher's Stone cannot be rushed. You should rest. Dewey, still flushed from the trials, waved her concern away. Don't worry, I don't feel tired now. I can continue. Galadriel, however, sided with Arwen. Narya can mask physical fatigue, but your soul also needs rest. Listen to Arwen and sleep. When the Lady Galadriel herself advised rest, Dewey yielded. After bidding her farewell, he fell into a deep sleep to the soft strains of Arwen's elven song. Before his consciousness faded, he thought of the next stage of the stone, the soul stage, or citrinitas, in which the white stone would be turned to yellow. For that, he would need the appearance of Lumbar, Saturn, and the addition of earth elements drawn from the Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain. According to astronomical calculations, Lumbar would next appear in 3 months, giving him ample time to prepare for the Citrinitas stage. 240. Invisibility Cloak. The production of the Philosopher's Stone was temporarily halted. Dewey had to wait for Saturn to appear before he could proceed to the next stage of the transmutation. He rested for a few days, regained his strength, and then turned his attention to other matters. He did not intend to sit idle during the months while he waited. Dewey remembered the method for making an invisibility cloak that he had acquired when signing in at Dongyi City, and decided to craft one in the meantime. Ordinary invisibility cloaks in the wizarding world are usually woven fabrics enchanted with the disillusionment charm or an invisibility spell. The most valuable are made from demiguy's hair. Even so, those cloaks gradually fade and lose their invisibility over time. They can be pierced by spells such as the revealing charm and are still detectable by powerful magic. Only the invisibility cloak, one of the Deathly Hallows, has a permanent effect. Beyond mere invisibility, it can mask the wearer's magical aura, sounds, even heartbeat, thwarting conventional and unconventional detection alike. In the children's tale, The Tales of Beetle the Bard, the youngest of the Peverell brothers asked Death for something to avoid being found, and Death gave him the invisibility cloak. The story says that even Death could not find anyone hiding beneath it. After the eldest brother took the Elder Wand, and the second took the Resurrection Stone, and both met their ends, the youngest avoided Death's pursuit with the cloak and lived to an old age, finally passing the cloak to his descendants and greeting Death willingly. Of course, the story is not literal. The Peverells did not meet Death. They were formidable wizards who created the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Invisibility Cloak. Later tales cast them as gifts from Death. Still, the items themselves are extraordinary. The Elder Wand is the most powerful wand, the Resurrection Stone can summon the dead, and the Invisibility Cloak has endured for millennia, its power undiminished, saving Harry Potter more than once. Dewey's main reason for wanting an invisibility cloak was to hide from Sauron. Sauron kept the Great Eye of Flame constantly sweeping Mordor, and he possessed a palantir that could spy across vast distances. His palantir was a master stone, far more potent than Dewey's. The disturbance caused by Dewey's tapping of Mercury had already drawn Sauron's attention. If Galadriel had not been there to strip Sauron of his sight immediately, Dewey would have had no secrets left. Dewey did not yet know that Sauron had discovered his work on the Philosopher's Stone and was scheming to seize it. He only wanted a cloak that could evade even a palantir and add another layer of security. Middle-earth had its own kinds of invisibility cloaks. The elven cloaks of Lothlorien were woven to make their wearers hard to notice, part notice me not, part disillusionment charm. Dewey already owned one such cloak, woven for him by Arwen. The fiercest example of concealment was Ungoliant's dark cloak. In the years of the two trees, Ungoliant wove a cloak of spider silk that covered herself and Morgoth and let them infiltrate Valinor, eluding even the Valar. Dewey did not aim to recreate something on the scale of Ungoliant's dark cloak, but he wanted at least an invisibility cloak with permanence like the Deathly Hallow, one that wouldn't fade with time. The crafting notes Dewey had obtained said the youngest Peverell had used the same raw material as ordinary cloaks, Demiguise hair. The difference lay in the magical process. Since Middle-earth had no Demiguises, Dewey needed to find a substitute. He chose giant spider silk without hesitation. Given Ungoliant's precedent of weaving a dark cloak from spider silk, silk from her descendants seemed the natural substitute. Dewey kept a colony of giant spiders in a chamber of Amonsul Tower at Hogwarts. Aside from serving as reserve food for Basilisk Herpo, they were controlled with Imperio and trained to be Hogwarts' exclusive weavers. The room where they lived was like a small ecosystem. The giant spiders sat in neat rows, spinning silk and deftly weaving strands with their forelegs. Under their rapid work, bolts of exquisite fabric were produced continuously. The cloth they made became bedding, carpets, curtains, and tapestries throughout the castle. It was extraordinarily tough. Ordinary blades scarcely nicked it, and it was resilient against flame. Barring catastrophic accidents, it could remain intact for centuries. That spider silk cloth also became the exclusive clothing for Dewey's vassals, attendants, and militia. Defensive yet lightweight garments that offered better protection than cumbersome armor. Dewey now governed the towns of Hogsmeade and Bree, each with tens of thousands of inhabitants, small cities in their own right. Militia groups had formed to defend them. Hogwarts had taken on more attendants and servants to guard and maintain the castle. The former town chiefs, Luke and Ratch, were now mayors of Hogsmeade and Bree respectively, still competing for prestige. Those who received garments made from the spider silk prized them like treasures. Ratch, the vain mayor of Bree, often wore his openly to impress guests. The silk's reputation drove demand and prices sky-high outside the castle. Inside Hogwarts, though, with hundreds of giant spiders spinning constantly, Dewey had stockpiled vast quantities. The silk that fetched fortunes beyond the walls had simply become standard uniforms for militia, attendants, and cleaning staff within. Dewey had no need to sell it for profit. Smaug did not see it that way. Declaring himself Dewey's treasurer and accountant, he dreamed of hoarding mountains of gold. He ceased sleeping, volunteered for every task, and turned into a merciless capitalist, watching the giant spiders churn out cloth while managing sales through his butler, Edward. Smaug even manipulated supply and demand, claiming the cloth was painstaking to make, only an inch a day, forcing merchants into bidding wars. Dewey could only watch, bemused, as Smaug counted coins into his coffers. Dewey returned his attention to the spiders in the tower and sighed. These spiders were useful. Their silk was tough and held some magical conductivity, but they were ordinary giant spiders, distant descendants of Ungoliant with diluted bloodlines. For an invisibility cloak, superior raw material mattered. The better the silk, the better the cloak. The silk from these spiders would not do. The only silk Dewey had ever found truly acceptable was from the giant spider queen of Mirkwood, the queen whose bloodline was closest to Ungoliant. That spider had been so powerful that Dewey, Thranduil, and Radagast the Brown together struggled to bring it down. Unfortunately, that queen had long since become Basilisk Herpo's dinner, so her silk was gone. What Dewey truly desired, in his private fantasies, was Ungoliant's own silk. Woven into a cloak, it might have been the dark cloak itself, something even Manwë could not detect. Ungoliant's webs had once bound Morgoth until the Balrogs had to tear them apart with whips of flame, which demonstrated how immeasurably strong her silk must be. Of course, Ungoliant herself was not an option. Facing her would mean certain doom. Still, if he could get silk from Shelob, the great spider and one of Ungoliant's offspring, that might be within reach. Shelob had been born in the First Age and fled east after the War of Wrath, eventually establishing a brood near Mordor and spawning the giant spider population around Mirkwood. The previous Spider Queen of Mirkwood had been Shelob's offspring and had retained some of her strength. If Dewey could obtain silk from Shelob or her closest descendants, he might finally be able to weave an invisibility cloak worthy of his needs, perhaps even one to rival the Deathly Hallows cloak.